Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Rider channel. I'm really glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe it's been a long day on the road, or maybe you're the kind of person who finds something deeply calming about the smell of engine oil, the sound of a throttle opening up on an empty highway, and the feeling of two wheels carrying you somewhere the rest of the world hasn't thought to look yet. Either way, tonight is for you. There's nothing you need to do right now except rest. Let your shoulders drop, let your breathing slow, and let the noise of the day fade out like taillights disappearing around a bend in the dark. Because tonight, we're going on a long ride through the world of motorcycles. Not just the machines themselves, but the people who built them, the cultures that shaped them, the roads that define them, and the hundreds of strange, beautiful, surprising, and quietly astonishing facts that live in the corners of this world most riders never think to look. Some of what you hear tonight will probably surprise you. Some of it might change how you see the bike sitting in your garage, and some of it will just drift past you like mile markers on a night ride, soft and steady, no destination required. So get comfortable, settle in, and if this kind of easy, unhurried exploration of the things you love is exactly what you needed at the end of a long day, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more where this is coming from, and it's all waiting for you whenever you need it. Now, let's ride. The fastest production motorcycle ever built doesn't look like what you'd expect. The Dodge Tomahawk, unveiled in 2003, had a Viper V10 engine displacing 8.3 liters, producing around 500 horsepower, and it was estimated to be theoretically capable of reaching speeds somewhere between 300 and 420 miles per hour. Dodge never officially tested it at top speed. The company sold exactly 9 of them, each priced at $500,000, and they were sold as static display pieces, not as street-legal or even track-legal vehicles. The buyers received them with the understanding that riding one was, to put it gently, an exercise in trusting the universe at a level most humans are not equipped for. The Tomahawk had 4 wheels arranged in 2 pairs to remain upright, so technically it skirted the line between motorcycle and something else entirely. But it ran, it breathed, and it made a sound that reportedly turned the air around it into something that felt less like atmosphere and more like a physical warning. One of the 9 sold for $555,000 at the Barrett-Jackson auction. It now lives in a private collection, perfectly still, faster than almost anything that has ever existed, and going absolutely nowhere. The first motorcycle in history didn't run on gasoline. In 1867, a man named Sylvester Howard Roper built a steam-powered 2-wheeled vehicle in Massachusetts. It had a charcoal-fired boiler between the wheels and could reach speeds of around 40 miles per hour, which at the time was faster than almost any horse you could find. Roper would eventually die on the thing in 1896 after riding it at the Charles River bicycle track in Cambridge, where he reportedly hit 40 miles per hour before collapsing from what witnesses described as heart failure. The machine was still running when he fell off. He was 73 years old. The Smithsonian Institution later acquired the Roper steam velocipede, and it sits there today as the earliest surviving self-propelled vehicle of its kind in American history. Roper never patented his invention. He just built it, rode it, and kept riding it until he literally couldn't anymore. There is a motorcycle graveyard in Southeast Asia that holds tens of thousands of abandoned bikes, and almost none of them belong to anyone who chose to leave them there. In the aftermath of the Vietnam War, American military personnel left behind enormous quantities of equipment across Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Among that equipment were hundreds of military motorcycles, primarily Honda Super Cubs, that had been acquired through various wartime contracts. As the country opened economically through the 1980s and 1990s, these machines became deeply woven into everyday Vietnamese life. The Honda Cub, in particular, became the most successful motorized vehicle in Vietnamese history, not because the Vietnamese government promoted it, but because the people simply adopted it as the backbone of daily transportation. Today, Vietnam has one of the highest rates of motorcycle ownership per capita on the planet. In the major cities, motorcycles don't share the road with cars so much as cars timidly insert themselves into a river of motorcycles that has been flowing for decades and will likely keep flowing long after the cars are gone. The longest motorcycle ever built stretched just over 26 meters. That's longer than a standard school bus by a comfortable margin. It was built by Bharat Singh Parmar of India and officially measured in 2014 for the Guinness World Records. It was a functional, rideable machine, though navigating a corner in it would require a level of patience and advanced planning that most people reserve for international travel. The motorcycle moved under its own power. It turned. It was, by every reasonable standard, a motorcycle. It was also, by every reasonable standard, absolutely ridiculous. And that's exactly why it's worth knowing about. The world record for the longest wheelie on a motorcycle is a separate, equally committed category of human achievement, held by Terry Doyle of South Africa, who maintained a wheelie for 331.7 kilometers in 1999. These are not things that happen by accident. These are things that happen because somewhere in every generation, there are people who look at a perfectly functioning motorcycle and ask themselves, what would happen if they just kept going? Motorcycles are statistically safer in one very specific and counterintuitive way. In a head-on collision, a motorcycle is far more likely to let its rider survive than a car is. This sounds absurd until you understand the physics. In a car, the occupant is rigidly enclosed by a metal structure that absorbs the impact energy by deforming around them. In a motorcycle, the rider is almost always thrown clear of the machine entirely, which means the motorcycle absorbs a portion of the initial collision force, while the rider's body, now airborne, carries the remaining momentum in a separate trajectory. This separation is the key. The rider still has a terrible time of it, but they are not being crushed inside a folding metal box. Motorcycle safety researchers have noted for decades that the survivability of certain high-speed impacts is paradoxically higher on a bike than in a car, not because motorcycles are safer in general, but because the physics of being ejected from a motorcycle are fundamentally different from the physics of being trapped in one. None of this is an argument against helmets or gear. It's simply a reminder that the universe has a very strange sense of what passes for good news. The sound a motorcycle engine makes is not an accident. Engine manufacturers, particularly in the cruiser and custom markets, spend enormous resources engineering the specific acoustic signature of their products. Harley-Davidson famously attempted to trademark the distinctive potato-potato-potato sound of its V-twin engine in 1994, filing an application with the United States Patent and Trademark Office that described the sound as a loud, distinctive chug. The application was contested by 9 other motorcycle manufacturers, including Honda, Suzuki, Kawasaki, and Yamaha, who argued that the sound was a natural byproduct of the engine configuration and therefore not unique enough to be protected. Harley-Davidson withdrew the application 6 years later in 2000, but the attempt itself is remarkable. It tells you something about how seriously motorcycle culture takes sound. The exhaust note of a bike isn't just noise, it's identity. It's the auditory equivalent of a silhouette, and the people who build these machines know exactly what they're doing when they tune the pipes. There is a type of motorcycle racing where the riders compete on ice, studded tires spinning against frozen lakes at speeds exceeding 120 miles per hour, and the most successful competitors in the sport's history have come overwhelmingly from Russia and Eastern Europe. Ice Speedway, as it's formally known, has been practiced since the 1920s, and the motorcycle setup is about as extreme as the conditions. The front wheel has no brake at all. The bikes have no brakes whatsoever, in fact. Slowing down is accomplished entirely by the rider rolling off the throttle and allowing the studded rear tire to drag. Cornering is done in a permanent sideways drift, leaning against the direction of the corner at angles that would signal certain death on a normal track. The riders wear reinforced leather suits with spiked boots to drag against the ice during turns for additional control. They look like something from a nightmare about medieval combat on frozen surfaces. The sport is almost entirely unknown outside of Europe and Russia, and within those places, it is followed with the kind of devotion normally reserved for national religions. The Honda Super Cub is the best-selling motor vehicle in the history of the world. Not the best-selling motorcycle, the best-selling motor vehicle, period, across all categories including cars, trucks, and vans. Since its introduction in 1958, more than 100 million Super Cubs have been manufactured, a number that surpasses the total production of any individual automobile model ever made. The Super Cub was designed to be simple, reliable, inexpensive, and operable by virtually anyone regardless of prior experience with machines. Honda's original pitch to the American market in the late 1950s used the famous tagline, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda," which was a deliberate effort to distance the motorcycle from its association with outlaw biker culture. It worked. The Super Cub didn't just sell, it transformed entire economies. In rural Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America, the Super Cub is not a recreational vehicle. It is the mechanism by which goods travel, by which children reach school, by which families stay connected across distances that would otherwise be impassable. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most consequential manufactured objects of the 20th century. The world's most expensive production motorcycle costs more than most houses in the developed world. The Neiman Marcus Limited Edition Fighter, built by Confederate Motors and sold through the Neiman Marcus Christmas catalog, was priced at $110,000. But that's not even the top of the market. Custom builders like Dodge Viper engined one-offs and hand-fabricated art pieces have been auctioned for well above $1 million. The record for a motorcycle sold at auction is held by a 1951 Vincent Black Lightning, which sold for $929,000 in 2018. The Vincent Black Lightning is widely considered the pinnacle of British motorcycle engineering from the post-war era, and the example sold at auction was one of approximately 31 ever built. At the time of its construction, It was the fastest production motorcycle in the world. Decades later, it remains one of the most beautiful objects ever built, with steel, aluminum, and the accumulated knowledge of people who cared deeply about making something that mattered. If you ride a motorcycle at night and look down at the road surface in your headlight beam, what you're seeing is a technology that was invented by accident. Reflective road markings, the paint and embedded glass beads that make highway lanes visible at night, were developed in the 1930s when highway engineer Percy Shaw noticed that road markers were reflecting back at him in his car's headlights. He realized the reflecting surface was a cat's eyes, and he developed a system of embedded reflectors that could replicate that effect at road level, regardless of weather conditions. The technology that keeps motorcycle riders alive on dark roads every night around the world was invented because a man looked at a cat and thought about light. Ride safely and tell the next cat you see that it's owed a debt. The concept of a motorcycle lane filter, where motorcycles move between lanes of stopped traffic, is not just a practical matter. It is a subject of genuine scientific research into road safety, and almost every major study conducted in the first 2 decades of the 21st century concluded the same thing. Lane filtering reduces accidents for motorcyclists. The reason is counterintuitive but logical. The highest risk moment for a motorcycle in traffic is being stationary in a lane, surrounded by vehicles whose drivers may not notice the bike while creeping forward. When motorcycles are permitted to move to the front of stopped traffic, they remove themselves from this vulnerable position. They also reduce the amount of time they spend in proximity to distracted drivers. Countries and states that permit lane filtering consistently show lower rates of rear-end collisions involving motorcycles. And yet the practice remains illegal in most jurisdictions in the United States, which is a fact that is considerably easier to accept if you are not the motorcyclist sitting at a red light, fully exposed, watching the car behind you approach in the mirror and hoping very much that the driver is paying attention. Now, before we go further, if you're someone who thinks while you rest, the kind of person who'd rather drift off thinking about motorcycles than counting sheep, subscribe. New rides drop regularly, and this channel exists entirely for people who find calm in curiosity. The first woman to ride a motorcycle across the United States did it in 1916. Her name was Effie Hotchkiss, and she completed the journey from New York to San Francisco on a Harley-Davidson sidecar outfit with her mother riding as passenger. The roads she traveled on for much of the journey would not have been recognized as roads by anyone living today. They were, in many places, wagon tracks through mud, river crossings with no bridges, and stretches of desert where the nearest town was a day's ride away and the nearest mechanic was considerably further. Effie Hotchkiss didn't just complete the trip, she did it without incident, documented it publicly, and returned home across the southern states to complete a full cross-country loop. She received virtually no attention from the mainstream press. The story of her journey survived primarily through her own letters and diaries. In 2016, the American Motorcyclist Association inducted her into the Motorcycle Hall of Fame, 100 years after she'd earned the recognition. The sound insulation in modern motorcycle helmets is sophisticated enough that it creates a form of psychological effect that researchers have specifically studied. When you put on a full-face helmet and the ambient sound drops, your brain reads the sudden acoustic isolation as a signal that the environment has changed and something in the nervous system actually relaxes. Studies on motorcycle riders and hearing protection have found that riders who wear properly fitted full-face helmets report lower levels of perceived stress during rides compared to riders wearing open-face helmets, even when controlling for factors like speed and traffic. The quiet inside a good helmet isn't just silence. It's a specific, enclosed kind of silence, the kind that is very hard to find anywhere else in modern life. Wind noise can still penetrate, yes, but the quality of it is different. It becomes consistent, surrounding almost white noise in character. A lot of people ride motorcycles for a long time before they realize that part of what they love about riding is the particular solitude of that acoustic space. Motorcycles have been used in warfare on every continent except Antarctica, and in almost every conflict of the 20th century, their role was not simply transportation. Military motorcycle scouts operated in conditions where wheeled vehicles could not follow, and where the alternative was a soldier on foot, moving at walking pace. In the First World War, the British Royal Flying Corps used motorcycles extensively for courier work, running messages between command posts across terrain that had been churned into impassable mud by artillery. In the Second World War, the German military deployed over 80,000 BMW R-75 and Zundap KS 750 motorcycle combinations with sidecars fitted for MG-34 machine guns in the North African and Eastern European theaters. The Harley-Davidson WLA, produced in huge numbers for the Allied forces, was affectionately called the Liberator and saw service in every theater of the war. More than 90,000 WLAs were built for wartime service. Many of them survived the war, were sold as surplus, and became the foundation of the American custom motorcycle culture that exploded in the late 1940s. The motorcycle that gave birth to the outlaw biker image in American culture was, in a very real sense, a military surplus machine ridden by veterans who couldn't quite figure out how to stop moving. The Isle of Man TT race is the most dangerous motorsport event in the world by a significant margin. Run on public roads in the British Crown dependency of the Isle of Man since 1907, the TT course covers 37.73 miles of narrow roads, stone walls, hedgerows, and village streets that are used by regular traffic in the weeks before and after the event. The average speed at which top competitors complete the course now exceeds 135 miles per hour. That is an average speed. Through village streets, past stone walls with no runoff. The death toll since the race began stands at more than 260 riders and spectators, making it statistically the most lethal sporting event on Earth. And yet, the waiting list for entry grows every year. The Isle of Man TT doesn't continue because the danger is unknown. It continues because riders come from around the world specifically because of the danger. There is something about riding at that level, on those roads, in that format, that draws a very specific kind of person, and that person cannot be talked out of it with statistics. They already know the statistics. They signed up anyway. The oldest motorcycle club still in operation was founded in 1903. The Federation of American Motorcyclists, which would later evolve into the American Motorcyclist Association, traces its organizational roots to that year. But the oldest individual club with continuous membership, the New England Motorcycle Club, was organized in 1903 in Massachusetts and held its first formal run that same year on roads that were barely wide enough for two horses to pass each other. The members wore full suits, ties, and goggles. They brought picnic lunches. They almost certainly had a genuinely extraordinary time, and the culture they built around those early rides, the camaraderie, the shared identity, the sense of belonging to a group of people who'd chosen a particular way of moving through the world, that culture has not fundamentally changed in more than 120 years. Different machines, different gear, different roads, same impulse, same feeling on the other side. The lean angle at which MotoGP riders corner is geometrically impossible to achieve safely on a public road motorcycle. The maximum lean angle of a modern MotoGP machine, measured from vertical to the outermost point of the bike and rider's body, regularly exceeds 65 degrees. At the Italian Grand Prix at Mugello, sensors have recorded lean angles of 68 degrees. This is a situation in which the rider's knee and elbow are below the axle of the wheel they're cornering around. The physics work because the tires used in MotoGP are nothing like what you put on your bike at home. They are compound-specific, temperature-specific, pressure-specific instruments that require a warm-up lap to bring them to operational temperature before they provide the grip that makes 68-degree lean angles survivable. Put those same tires on a cold road at an ambient temperature of 15 degrees Celsius and lean to 68 degrees, and the physics work out very differently. The machines are extraordinary. The conditions that make them work are equally extraordinary. Most of what MotoGP riders do on a given Sunday afternoon is technically impossible outside the specific, controlled environment of a race circuit prepared for that exact purpose. And this is something that race commentary rarely makes quite clear enough. Harley-Davidson's survival in the early 1980s is one of the more remarkable turnaround stories in American industrial history. By 1981, the company had been owned by AMF, the bowling and recreational equipment conglomerate, for 13 years, and the quality of the motorcycles had declined to a point where the joke in the industry was that Harley-Davidson stood for hardly drivable. Oil leaks were endemic. Reliability was poor enough that it was commonly said that you needed 2 Harleys, one to ride and one for parts. In 1981, 13 executives bought the company back from AMF in a leveraged buyout with borrowed money. By 1983, they were close to bankruptcy again, having lost enormous market share to Japanese manufacturers whose bikes simply worked better. The executives went to Congress and made the case for protective tariffs on imported heavyweight motorcycles. The Reagan administration granted them a 5-year tariff on Japanese bikes over 700 cubic centimeters. Harley used those 5 years to transform their manufacturing processes, implement statistical quality control techniques borrowed from Japanese manufacturing philosophy, and rebuild the brand from the inside. In 1987, they asked the government to remove the tariffs a year early because they no longer needed them. It is one of the few instances in American business history where a protectionist tariff was used as intended, absorbed the hit, fixed the underlying problem, and then voluntarily relinquished the protection. There is a place in the Swiss Alps where a road has been specifically engineered to provide the most satisfying possible motorcycle riding experience. The Gotthard Pass Road, which crosses the Alps at 2,106 meters of elevation, was reconstructed in the 20th century, with its curves laid out using principles that engineering literature later began to describe as designed for dynamic driving experience. This is not quite true in a formal sense. The road was designed for practical transit across the mountains. But the combination of elevation, exposure, and the particular geometry of the hairpin switchbacks that climb the southern face creates conditions that motorcycle riders consistently describe as the closest thing to flying that you can experience while remaining in contact with the ground. The road closes in winter. In summer, it fills with motorcycles from across Europe, many of which have made the journey specifically and solely to ride those particular corners on that particular road. The Gotthard Pass is, in a very real sense, a pilgrimage site. The shrine happens to be made of asphalt and altitude. The technology behind modern motorcycle ABS braking systems was originally developed for aircraft. Anti-lock braking as a concept was first implemented on aircraft in the 1930s, where the problem of a wheel locking under braking and resulting in a skid during landing was both obvious and immediately dangerous. The technology was refined through the 1950s and 1960s by companies like Dunlop and Bendix for aviation applications, then adapted for automobiles by Bosch in the late 1970s, and for motorcycles by BMW in 1988, when the BMW K100 became the first production motorcycle offered with ABS as standard equipment. The adoption was slow through the 1990s because the early systems were heavy, expensive, and required significant faith from riders who were accustomed to managing braking inputs themselves. The modern iteration is light, fast, reactive enough to intervene multiple times per second, and the research showing its effect on fatal motorcycle accidents is unambiguous. In most of the developed world, ABS is now either mandatory or strongly incentivized on new motorcycles through insurance discounts. The technology exists to save lives. The question of how quickly it spreads is a question about institutional will rather than technical capability. The smell of a two-stroke engine exhaust is one of the most recognizable and oddly nostalgic scents in motorsport, and it triggers a specific memory response in people who encountered it early in life in a way that very few other sensory experiences do. This is not simply anecdotal. The olfactory system in the human brain is neurologically unique in that smell signals travel directly to the limbic system, the part of the brain that processes emotion and memory, without first passing through the analytical processing regions that handle other sensory input. This means smells can trigger fully formed emotional memories before the conscious mind has had time to recognize what it's smelling. For millions of people who grew up around motocross, karting, or small displacement two-stroke bikes, the specific smell of Castrol R or a similar two-stroke oil blend in exhaust fumes is so deeply associated with early formative memories of joy and freedom that catching a whiff of it in adult life can produce an involuntary emotional response that bypasses rational thought entirely. It is, in a very technical sense, a time machine that fits in your nostrils. The Bro Superior, built by George Bro in Nottingham, England between 1919 and 1940, was known as the Rolls-Royce of motorcycles. Every single machine was custom-built to the buyer's specifications, tested extensively before delivery, and accompanied by a certificate guaranteeing it had exceeded 100 miles per hour on the test track. The price was approximately equivalent to a small house. The waiting list was long. The customers included T.E. Lawrence, known as Lawrence of Arabia, who owned 7 Bro Superiors in sequence, named them all George, and was killed in an accident on the last one in 1935. He was swerving to avoid 2 boys on bicycles on a country road in Dorset. He survived the initial accident but died 6 days later from brain injuries. He was 46. Lawrence was a complicated figure in history by any measure, but his relationship with his motorcycles was apparently one of the uncomplicated things. He described riding them in letters as the nearest thing to flying that land allows. When the Brew Superior Company was revived in 2008 and began production again, the first new examples sold for over 100,000 pounds each. The waiting list started immediately. Motorcycles produce a measurably different physiological response in riders than driving a car does. A study conducted by Siemens Corporation in partnership with UCLA in 2011 measured the neurological activity, heart rate, and hormonal response of experienced motorcyclists during motorcycle rides compared to car drives of the same duration. The findings were specific and consistent. Riding a motorcycle increased riders' sensory focus by 27% compared to driving. Adrenaline increased significantly, along with cortisol, in ways that indicated alert but not stressed response. Heart rate elevated during riding in a pattern that the researchers compared to light exercise. The study found that after a 20-minute ride, the subjective reported feeling of mental alertness and mood improvement in participants was comparable to mild physical exercise. The conclusion was not that motorcycles are dangerous excitement. The conclusion was that riding engages the full attention of the rider's nervous system in a way that driving simply does not, and that this engagement appears to have measurable positive effects on mental state. This is what riders have been trying to explain to non-riders for 120 years. It turns out there's a neurological reason why the ride feels like the reset button. The first motorcycle to exceed 200 miles per hour under its own power without any external assistance was not a purpose-built land speed record machine. It was a modified production motorcycle. In 1956, Wilhelm Hertz rode a supercharged NSU streamliner to a speed of 211 miles per hour on the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah. But the NSU was a custom machine built specifically for the record. The achievement of 200 miles per hour on a recognizably production-based machine came later, through the efforts of the drag racing and land speed community who took the engines and running gear from standard motorcycles and pushed them with modifications that stopped just short of complete reconstruction. The Bonneville Salt Flats, where most motorcycle land speed records have been set since the 1930s, is itself a remarkable natural phenomenon. The flat salt surface is the remnant of a prehistoric lake called Lake Bonneville, which covered much of what is now Utah, Nevada, and Idaho approximately 14,000 years ago. The evaporation of that lake left behind a perfectly flat, perfectly white surface that extends for miles in every direction, creating a natural runway that cannot be artificially replicated. People go there from all over the world to find out how fast the thing they've built will go, which is one of the more ancient questions a human being can ask about a machine. The art of motorcycle customization in Japan is called Bosozoku style, and it is one of the most visually extreme aesthetic movements in motorcycle history. Emerging from the delinquent youth culture of 1950s and 1960s, Japan, Bosozoku style is characterized by wildly extended front forks, exhaust pipes that point vertically and can exceed the height of the rider, fiberglass fairings in lurid colors, and front fenders extended to almost touching the ground. The effect is simultaneously absurd and coherent. It is a style that makes absolutely no functional sense and is internally perfectly consistent. Bosozoku culture in Japan has its own hierarchy, its own music, its own fashion, and its own vocabulary. The motorcycles themselves are not generally fast. Speed is not the point. The point is visibility, identity, and the performance of a specific kind of defiant self-expression that is recognizable to everyone who sees it. Bosozoku's style has influenced custom motorcycle aesthetics around the world in ways that often go unacknowledged by people who think they invented something when they extended a front fork or wrapped a pipe upward. The originals were doing this 60 years before it showed up on any international custom scene. The rubber compound in a modern motorcycle tire is not designed to grip the road in the way most people intuitively assume. The grip between tire and road is not primarily a matter of adhesion in the chemical sense, the way glue sticks to a surface. It is primarily a matter of mechanical interlocking at a microscopic level, where the soft rubber deforms slightly into the microscopic surface irregularities of the road surface and fills them, creating a mechanical bond rather than an adhesive one. This is why wet roads are so much more dangerous than dry ones for motorcycles, not because water is slippery in itself, but because it fills those microscopic surface irregularities, preventing the rubber from deforming into them and creating the mechanical bond that provides grip. It's also why tire warmers exist, and why racing teams spend considerable time and resources bringing tires to a specific temperature range before competitive use. Cold rubber does not deform into surface irregularities with the same compliance as warm rubber. A tire that is physically cold is not just chemically different from a warm one. It is geometrically less capable of doing its job. This is why the first few miles of a cold morning ride on unfamiliar roads are statistically more likely to produce an incident than the middle miles. The tires are warming up to the task. Now, speaking of warmth, if this channel is the kind of company you like keeping, subscribe. This ride has a long way still to go. The Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, run on a mountain road in Colorado that reaches 14,115 feet of elevation, is the second oldest motorsport event in the United States, predated only by the Indianapolis 500. Motorcycles have competed at Pikes Peak since 1916. At the top of the mountain, the air is thin enough that both riders and engines perform noticeably differently than they do at sea level. The lower air pressure reduces engine power output, changes the handling characteristics of the motorcycle, and can affect the rider's own cognitive function if they are not acclimatized. In 2012, Carlin Dunn set the motorcycle course record with a time of 9 minutes and 52 seconds, becoming the first motorcycle competitor to break the 10-minute barrier on the course. Dunn was killed at Pikes Peak in 2019 while making what would have been a record-breaking run. He was 36. His death led to a permanent closure of the motorcycle class at Pikes Peak, which continues to this day. The silence in the motorcycle category at that race is a specific kind of absence, one that says something about what the sport costs and what it nevertheless keeps drawing people toward. The relationship between motorcycles and film is almost as old as film itself. One of the earliest narrative films featuring a motorcycle chase was produced by the Edison Manufacturing Company in 1907, and the genre of film in which motorcycles are used as chase vehicles has been continuous ever since. But the most culturally significant motorcycle in film history is probably not the one from The Great Escape, though that film did more to sell the specific fantasy of a man on a motorcycle and a border fence than any other piece of cinema. The most culturally significant motorcycle may be the custom chopper ridden by Peter Fonda's character Wyatt in Easy Rider in 1969, a film that crystallized a specific American mythology about freedom, the road, and the price of both. The Captain America bike, as it came to be known, was not built for the film. It was assembled from discarded police motorcycles that the producers purchased at auction for $500 each. The finished machine was valued at substantially more than that by the time it appeared on screen. 3 were reportedly built for filming purposes. 2 were stolen after production wrapped. The surviving one sold at auction in 2014 for $1.3 million. Motorcycle helmets were not legally required anywhere in the world until the late 1960s, and the fights over helmet laws have been politically contentious in almost every country that has attempted them. In the United States, federal legislation in 1966 tied highway funding to state helmet laws, which led to widespread adoption through the late 1960s and 1970s. When that federal leverage was removed in the 1990s, following lobbying from motorcycle rights organizations, several states repealed their universal helmet laws. The arguments against mandatory helmet laws are not primarily about safety. The people making them are generally aware of the safety data. The arguments are about autonomy and the principle that the state should not be able to compel a competent adult to protect themselves against their own choice. This is a coherent position within a specific philosophical framework. It is also a position that the trauma surgeons who treat head-injured motorcyclists without helmets have a consistently strong set of feelings about. The argument continues, and neither side shows any sign of feeling they've been heard adequately by the other. Valentino Rossi is not only the most successful motorcycle road racer in history by championships and wins across multiple classes, he is one of the most methodically studied athletes in any sport. His ability to continue competing at the highest level into his late 30s in MotoGP was examined in enough academic sports science literature that by the mid-2010s, there was a meaningful body of research specifically about his physical conditioning, cognitive processing speed, and recovery protocols. The research found nothing supernatural. He was not built differently from other elite athletes. What emerged, however, was a picture of extraordinary attention to the non-physical aspects of performance, including visualization, mental rehearsals of specific corners and breaking points, and a social and team management style that made the people around him perform better. Rossi's garage culture was famously warm and loyal in a sport full of cold calculation. The people who built his bikes worked for him across more than 2 decades, which is almost unheard of in a sport where engineers change teams with the frequency of musicians changing studios. The loyalty ran in both directions. When the results stopped coming, the people stayed anyway. The physics of a motorcycle's gyroscopic effect are misunderstood by a significant proportion of riders, including experienced ones. The widely repeated explanation that a motorcycle stays upright because of gyroscopic forces from the spinning wheels is not quite right. Gyroscopic forces do contribute to straight-line stability at speed, but they are not the primary mechanism by which a motorcycle remains upright. A bicycle or motorcycle can be ridden hands-free for extended periods because of the interplay between trail steering geometry and a property called caster effect, which causes the steering to self-correct toward the direction of any lean that develops. A motorcycle with non-spinning wheels could theoretically be made to balance and self-steer if the geometry were correct, though the practical challenges of testing this are significant. The actual mechanics of why a two-wheeled vehicle remains upright are complicated enough that a definitive mathematical description was not published until 2011 in a paper in the journal Proceedings of the Royal Society, more than 150 years after the first rideable bicycle was built. Humanity had been riding bikes for a century and a half before we could fully explain why it worked. In some ways, that's the most honest possible relationship between humans and machines. The term café racer originated in Britain in the 1950s and refers to a style of motorcycle modification that emerged from the culture of young men who would race from café to café on the roads connecting London's suburbs, trying to complete the distance between two specific cafés, often the Ace Café on the North Circular Road, before a selected record on the jukebox had finished playing. The distance was typically around a mile. The record was typically 3 minutes. The required average speed was therefore approximately 20 miles per hour, which is not, in retrospect, a particularly terrifying pace. But the culture that built up around it, the stripped-down bikes with low handlebars, the leather jackets, the particular posture crouched over the tank, the café as community space, that culture became one of the most enduring and continuously influential movements in motorcycle history. The café racer aesthetic has been revived in every decade since the 1960s, always by people who discovered it fresh and then found out that what they thought they'd invented had a 60-year history. The discovery is always slightly humbling and ultimately doesn't matter, because the bikes look good regardless of who invented the idea. The human body makes very specific physiological adaptations to long-distance motorcycle riding that are unique to the activity and not replicated by other forms of travel. Riders who spend extended periods on motorcycles develop grip strength in the hands and forearms that is specifically the result of throttle management and handlebar vibration absorption. They develop a distinctive muscle pattern in the inner thighs from gripping the tank for stability during braking. Their postural muscles develop asymmetrically in ways that reflect their preferred riding style, with riders who habitually put more weight on one foot peg showing measurable differences in spinal muscle development between left and right sides. Long-distance tourers develop a relaxation response during rides that is physiologically distinct from the relaxation of sitting in a car, more similar in some respects to meditation than to passive travel. The body learns the rhythm of the road, the vibration of the engine, and the weight of movement, and after enough hours and miles, it begins to feel those things as home. There is a mountain road in the Nürburgring region of Germany, not the Nürburgring itself, but the local public roads in the Eifel Mountains nearby, where so many motorcycles are involved in accidents that the local hospital has a trauma protocol specifically designed for motorcycle injuries and maintains staffing levels on summer weekends that are calibrated to the expected volume of motorcycle trauma cases. The roads themselves are beautiful, winding through dense forest with smooth surfaces and well-marked corners. The problem is not the road quality. The problem is the concentration of riders from across Europe who come to ride these roads because they are beautiful and winding, and who, in many cases, arrive with skills that are not quite matched to their ambitions, or with sports motorcycles that are capable of far more than the human behind the controls can reliably manage. The local authorities have installed additional signage, increased police presence, and run public safety campaigns. The accident rates have remained consistent for decades. The roads are too good and too inviting, and the combination of that with the full spectrum of rider skill is not a problem that signs solve. The Japanese motorcycle manufacturer Kawasaki was not originally a motorcycle company at all. Kawasaki Heavy Industries, the parent company, was founded in 1896 as a shipbuilding and engineering company, and through the early 20th century was primarily involved in railway cars, aircraft, and industrial machinery. The company entered the motorcycle business in 1960 as a diversification strategy, partly in response to the success of Honda and the growing post-war Japanese consumer economy. Similarly, Yamaha, now one of the world's largest motorcycle manufacturers, began as a musical instrument company. Yamaha Motor Company was spun off from Nippon Gaki, which made Yamaha pianos and organs in 1955. The tuning fork in the Yamaha logo, which motorcycle riders see on their bikes every day, is a direct reference to the musical instrument heritage of the parent company. It's a detail that most Yamaha owners have looked at thousands of times without thinking about what it means. There is a world in which Yamaha made you a piano, and there is a world in which Yamaha made you a sport bike, and those two worlds are separated by about 65 years and one corporate restructuring decision. The thermal imaging cameras that are now used in military and law enforcement motorcycle pursuit vehicles originally came from a very different application. Night vision technology for motorcycle use, both in terms of helmet-integrated displays and vehicle-mounted systems, traces its development through the military motorcycle scout programs of the 1960s and 1970s, which were attempting to solve the problem of rapid, quiet reconnaissance in low-light conditions. The quiet part of that requirement is one of the less discussed aspects of military motorcycle history. Electric motorcycles were experimented with for military scouting purposes decades before they became commercially viable, specifically because their silence was a tactical advantage. The U.S. military was developing battery-powered scout motorcycles through government contracts as early as the 1970s, and several of the companies that received those early contracts became foundational to the modern electric motorcycle industry. The thread between the Army scouting a silent way to move a rider through a hostile perimeter and the electric motorcycle you can buy today for commuting is not long. It's just not often drawn. There is a breed of rider known informally as an iron butt rider, named after the Iron Butt Association, which was founded in 1987 to certify ultra-distance motorcycle rides. The entry-level certification requires completing a minimum of 1,000 miles in 24 hours, which sounds straightforward until you consider the physical reality of 1,000 miles in a single day on a motorcycle, including the fuel stops, the traffic, the variable weather, the 16 to 20 hours of constant vibration and wind load, and the cognitive demands of maintaining concentration across an entire day and typically part of a night. The most demanding iron butt certification, the Bun Burner Gold, requires 1,500 miles in 24 hours. The record for distance covered in a 24-hour period on a motorcycle stands at 2,165 miles, set in 2003 by a rider on a BMW, and it required not a moment of sleep and a refueling strategy that had been calculated in advance to the nearest minute. The people who pursue these certifications are not doing it for prize money. There is none. They are doing it because they want to find out something about themselves that ordinary riding doesn't answer. The weight of a motorcycle against its power-to-weight ratio tells you almost everything important about how it will feel to ride. A modern superbike producing 200 horsepower and weighing 170 kilograms has a power-to-weight ratio that puts it in the same range as a Formula One car from the early 1990s. A touring motorcycle producing 100 horsepower and weighing 350 kilograms has a power-to-weight ratio closer to a performance car from the same era. The subjective experience of those two machines is so different that riders who prefer one type frequently find the other completely unenjoyable, not because one is better than the other, but because they are asking completely different things of the person on them. The superbike rewards aggression, commitment, and precision. The tourer rewards patience, endurance, and the ability to sit with the journey rather than chase the corner. Some riders find their way to both. Most riders, if they are honest, know which one they really are and spend the rest of their riding life either accepting or fighting that knowledge. The art of reading a motorcycle's handling through the seat of the pants is a skill that takes years to develop and that cannot be taught from a book or a video. What experienced riders describe as feel is the sum of thousands of sensory inputs arriving through the contact patches between the tires and the road, through the frame flex transmitted to the foot pegs, through the handlebar vibration reaching the palms, through the sound of the engine and the air, through the way the body's own weight shifts under braking and acceleration and cornering load. Experienced riders process this information unconsciously and respond to it at a reflex level that bypasses deliberate thought. The gap between a new rider and an experienced one is not primarily a gap in knowledge. It is a gap in sensory integration. The new rider has to think about everything. The experienced rider has automated the thinking and freed the mind for something else, which is why experienced riders can have a conversation with a passenger, notice the texture of the sky ahead, and think about what they're going to eat when they stop, while simultaneously managing a machine at speeds that would consume every bit of a new rider's available cognitive bandwidth. The experience doesn't make riding automatic, it makes it spacious. There is a road in California called the Pacific Coast Highway that is, for motorcycle purposes, arguably the most photographed and most ridden scenic road in the world. But the motorcycle riders who live in California will tell you, quietly and with a slight look of having something to protect, that there are roads in the coastal mountains east of the PCH that are better. They are narrower, less maintained, less populated, and the corners are tighter and more committed. These roads don't have names that appear in travel magazines. They don't have Instagram tags with 6-digit post counts. They are known by the people who know them, and those people are generally reluctant to advertise the fact. This is a universal feature of motorcycle culture across every geography. The best roads are always slightly secret, not hidden exactly, but not announced either. You find them by being curious, by taking the road that looks less traveled and seeing where it goes, and by talking to the right person at the right fuel stop at the right hour of the afternoon. The best roads have always been a reward for paying attention. The vibration frequency of a Harley-Davidson V-twin engine at idle is approximately 29 Hertz, which is in the lower range of human tactile perception and has been specifically studied in the context of the emotional and physiological response it produces in riders. Research into infrasound and low-frequency vibration has found that frequencies in the range of 18 to 35 Hertz can produce a range of physical sensations, from unease at some frequencies to a sense of resonance and comfort at others, depending on the specific frequency, duration, and context. The particular frequency of the Harley-Davidson Idol appears based on the reported subjective experience of riders and the self-selected population of people who specifically seek out that engine character in a motorcycle to fall in a range that many humans find viscerally satisfying. This might be partially why Harley-Davidson sound is so strongly associated with emotional responses in both riders and bystanders, and why the attempt to trademark it, mentioned earlier in tonight's ride, was not purely a commercial decision. It was a recognition that the sound of that engine was not just a noise, it was a physical experience. The motorcycle dispatch riders of the First World War were among the most consistently decorated soldiers of the conflict. Their job required them to carry messages between command posts across terrain that had been rendered impassable to vehicles and under fire that made the journey continuously life-threatening. The average life expectancy of a motorcycle dispatch rider at the front was measured in weeks during the most intense periods of the war. They were paid the same as infantry soldiers. They received no special hazard allowance. They rode in conditions that modern adventure motorcycle riders, navigating the same Belgian and French countryside in clear weather on good tires, find technically challenging. They did it in the dark, under fire, on machines that were essentially unmodified commercial motorcycles with no wind protection, no navigation, and no communication with anyone until they arrived at their destination. Many of them arrived anyway. Many of them didn't. The ones who did generally got back on and went again. And with that, let the road go quiet for a moment. You're well into the ride now. The best part of the night is ahead. Keep going. The world's highest navigable road passes through motorcycle territory. The Kardung La Pass in Ladakh, India, claimed for decades to be the highest motorable road in the world at 5,359 meters, has been traversed by motorcycles since roads in the region were opened to foreign visitors in 1988. The Royal Enfield Bullet, a British-designed motorcycle manufactured in India since 1955, became so associated with the mountain roads of Ladakh and the broader Himalayan region that it effectively created its own category of travel. The Bullet's long-stroke, low-revving single-cylinder engine, which produces modest power by any modern standard, is nevertheless well-suited to the altitude-affected conditions of mountain riding, where a high-revving multi-cylinder engine would suffer dramatically from the thin air. Riders from across India, and then increasingly from across the world, began making the journey to Ladakh on Royal Enfields as a kind of pilgrimage, and the route through Manali to Leh became one of the most celebrated motorcycle journeys on the planet. The roads are not comfortable. The altitude produces genuine physiological effects on unprepared riders. The scenery is in a category that makes most other landscapes feel like they're trying too hard. The technology behind modern motorcycle traction control systems is significantly more complex than the traction control in most passenger cars, and for a specific reason. A motorcycle's attitude during a wheelie, where the front wheel is off the ground and all the load is on the rear, is a legitimate and sometimes intended condition that the traction control system needs to distinguish from an unintended wheel spin event. A car's traction control simply detects wheel speed differential between driven and undriven wheels, and reduces power when the differential becomes too large. A motorcycle's traction control needs to understand pitch angle, lean angle, wheel load distribution, and the distinction between the rider wanting to wheelie and the rear wheel spinning unexpectedly in a corner, which are very different situations requiring different responses. The IMU, or inertial measurement unit, that sits at the heart of modern motorcycle safety electronics packages is a 6-axis sensor that measures acceleration and rotation in 3 dimensions and feeds this data to the safety system at hundreds of times per second. It is the same technology that sits inside a smartphone, miniaturized and made reliable enough to be trusted with keeping a human being on the road at 100 miles per hour. The gap between the technology in your pocket and the technology keeping a sport bike upright in a corner is smaller than most riders realize. The phenomenon of target fixation, where a rider's focus on an obstacle causes them to steer toward rather than away from it, is one of the most counterintuitive and dangerous aspects of motorcycle riding and one of the most thoroughly documented in rider training literature. The mechanism is neurological. The brain's motor control systems are wired to move toward the things that hold visual attention, and the effort required to consciously override this response while simultaneously managing the physical inputs of a motorcycle in an emergency situation is enough to overwhelm many riders' available cognitive resources. Training programs that specifically address target fixation work by rehearsing the deliberate response of looking where you want to go rather than where you don't want to go until it becomes an automated counter-response. This training works, and the research confirming it works is unambiguous. The challenge is that the training needs to happen before the situation occurs, because in the moment, there is rarely time for deliberate thought. The rider who has trained the response will steer away. The rider who hasn't may steer toward the very thing they are trying to avoid. This is not a character flaw. It is a predictable physiological response to a specific stimulus, and knowing about it is the first step toward not being subject to it. There is a motorcycle museum in Anamosa, Iowa, which is the town where artist Grant Wood was born and which also happens to be home to the National Motorcycle Museum, established in 1990 and containing one of the most comprehensive collections of American and international motorcycles ever assembled in a single location. The collection includes machines that represent every significant era of American motorcycle history, from the earliest board track racers of the 1910s to factory prototype machines that never reached production, to racing machines with documented histories in the major events of their eras. The museum receives visitors from every continent. Many of them make Anamosa their specific destination, arriving from hundreds of miles away in a city that has very little else that would conventionally draw international tourism. The motorcycles are the reason. This is a consistent pattern in motorcycle museum culture globally. People who love motorcycles will travel extraordinary distances to be in the presence of specific machines, not to ride them, just to stand near them and look at them. The machines carry history in a way that a photograph cannot replicate, and the people who seek them out are seeking something specific that they can apparently feel when they're close enough. The smell of rain on hot asphalt, which motorcycle riders experience more directly than drivers of enclosed vehicles, has a name. The technical term is petrichor, coined in 1964 by 2 Australian researchers, Isabel Joy Baer and Richard Grenfell Thomas, who were studying the chemical processes by which aromatic compounds are released from soil and rock surfaces when rain falls on hot, dry ground. The smell is produced primarily by geosmin, a compound produced by soil bacteria, and by oils released from plant materials into the surrounding rock and earth during dry periods. When rain falls, these accumulated compounds are released as aerosols. For motorcycle riders who are exposed directly to the air and travel at speeds where they are continuously sampling the atmosphere ahead, petrichor arrives before the rain does. Experienced riders will tell you they can smell rain coming on a dry road several minutes before the first drops fall. This is not metaphor. It is a real and trainable sensory skill, and it is among the reasons that experienced riders in regions with variable weather develop a relationship with the air itself that feels less like meteorology and more like conversation. The grip tape that wraps the handlebars of many custom and competition motorcycles comes from skateboard culture. The crossover between skateboarding aesthetics and motorcycle customization culture is deeper than the surface similarity of the tape might suggest. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the generation of riders who were also participants in skateboard and BMX culture began customizing their motorcycles in ways that borrowed directly from those worlds, including graphics, color schemes, industrial materials used as aesthetic elements, and a general philosophy of making things look deliberately unfinished as a way of signaling authenticity over commercial polish. This influence has now permeated the mainstream of motorcycle customization to the point where the aesthetic has become industrialized, with major manufacturers producing factory custom options that replicate the look of handmade modifications. The distance between a custom bike built in a small workshop by someone who genuinely didn't have the budget for a commercial finish and a factory-produced version of the same aesthetic is one that the people in those small workshops are generally aware of and generally philosophical about. The machines tell the truth to anyone who knows how to look. Let that thought carry you gently. The road keeps going, and so does the night. There's plenty more ahead. The oldest motorcycle race in continuous operation in the United States is not the Daytona 200, which began in 1937. It is the Jack Pine Enduro, an off-road endurance event that has been run in Michigan since 1925. The Jack Pine covers approximately 500 miles of unpaved trails, logging roads, and forest paths in the lower peninsula of Michigan over 2 days of competition. It was one of the defining events of early American motorcycling, a test of machine reliability and rider endurance rather than outright speed. The event was used by American motorcycle manufacturers in its early decades as a proving ground for new technology, with factory entries and significant engineering resources committed to winning the reliability prize. Today, it continues as an amateur event with deep historical roots, attended by riders who value continuity with the history of the sport more than the spectacle of contemporary stadium motocross or road racing. It is a quiet race in a quiet landscape, and the people who love it are exactly the kind of people you'd want to meet at the end of a trail. The Ducati company was not founded to make motorcycles. It was founded in 1926 by Antonio Cavalieri Ducati and his 3 sons to make electrical equipment for radios and telecommunications. The company's products included vacuum tubes, capacitors, and radio components, and the Ducati name became associated with precision engineering in electronics rather than mechanics. After the Second World War, during which the factory in Bologna was destroyed by Allied bombing, the company rebuilt and pivoted toward transportation, initially producing a small clip-on engine called the Cucciolo, the puppy, which could be attached to a bicycle. The Cucciolo led to progressively more capable motorcycles, and by the 1950s, Ducati was producing proper motorcycles that were competitive in Italian racing. The company's identity as a performance motorcycle manufacturer was established by engineer Fabio Taglioni, who joined in 1954 and whose bevel gear drive desmodromic valve engine design became the defining technological signature of the brand. The desmodromic system, which uses mechanical cams to both open and close the valves rather than relying on springs, allows higher engine speeds with greater reliability than conventional spring return systems. It is mechanically elegant, mechanically complex, and requires skilled maintenance. It is, in other words, a Ducati. The continental United States has exactly one stretch of road that is consistently rated by motorcycle publications and riders' organizations as the single best ride in the country. It is Highway 1 on the Big Sur coast of California, and the consensus is so strong and so consistent across decades of polling and editorial content that disputing it feels almost beside the point. What makes Big Sur specifically superior to the other legitimate contenders, including Highway 129 in North Carolina, the Blue Ridge Parkway, Highway 12 in Utah, and the Beartooth Highway in Wyoming, is the combination of ocean, elevation, and the specific quality of light that the Northern California coast generates in the morning and late afternoon. The road is also technically demanding enough that it requires attention, which means the rider cannot become passive and default to thinking about other things. The ride keeps the rider present in a way that makes the experience of the landscape more vivid than passive viewing from a car window. This is the essential quality of the best roads anywhere. They don't just pass through beautiful places, they make you be in them. The motorcycle industry's relationship with women riders has been, to understate it considerably, inconsistent. Through most of the 20th century, the industry's marketing materials directed at women were, with rare exceptions, framed around women as passengers rather than operators. The Women's Motorcycle Association Motor Maids, founded in 1940, was for decades the primary organized community for women riders in the United States, and its existence was not prominently featured in the mainstream motorcycle press. The percentage of licensed motorcycle riders in the United States who are women has increased from approximately 8% in 1990 to approximately 19% in the early 2020s, a rate of growth that has substantially outpaced the overall growth of the rider population. Manufacturers have begun responding to this with ergonomic adjustments that address the shorter inseam and different weight distribution typical of women riders, though the industry is still some distance behind where its own data about the demographics of new riders would logically lead it. The women who have been riding motorcycles since before the industry cared about them are, by and large, still riding, and still largely unconcerned about whether the industry has caught up. The temperature at the center of a motorcycle tire's contact patch during hard cornering can reach 180 degrees Fahrenheit in a matter of seconds. This is hot enough to cause rubber to soften and become more compliant, which is part of what provides the grip increase as tires warm up during a ride. It is also hot enough that if you were to touch the surface of a tire immediately after it came off a fast cornering sequence, you would know about it. The tire warmers that racing teams use before a race are set to a specific temperature target that represents the lower end of the operational range, allowing the tire to reach full operational temperature within the first lap of racing rather than the first several laps. On the road, the equivalent of a tire warming routine is the first several miles of a cold ride, which is why experienced riders are deliberately progressive in their inputs during that period, regardless of their confidence in their own ability. The tire is not yet at operational temperature. The physics are different. The bike knows before the rider does. The oldest continuously manufactured motorcycle model in history is the Royal Enfield Bullet, which has been in production with recognizable lineage to the original design since 1932. The Bullet spent its first 2 decades being manufactured in Redditch, England, and from 1955 onward has been manufactured in India, where it has become one of the defining objects of a specific kind of aspirational ownership. Owning a Royal Enfield Bullet in India has carried cultural meaning beyond transportation for decades, associated with a particular kind of self-sufficient individualism and a willingness to maintain a machine that requires and rewards mechanical attention. The thump of the long-stroke single-cylinder Bullet engine is as recognizable in Indian culture as the sound of the Harley-Davidson Phi-Twin is in American culture, and for the same reason. It's not just a noise, it is an identity made audible. The machine has outlasted the country that invented it in any meaningful manufacturing sense, and it shows no signs of slowing down. The physics of a motorcycle high-side crash, where the rear tire loses grip and then suddenly regains it at a moment when the rider's body is already in motion in response to the slide, are widely regarded by motorcycle safety researchers as the most unpredictable and violent type of motorcycle accident. In a low-side crash, the tire continues sliding, and the rider and machine go down together in a controlled, survivable way in most cases. In a high side, the sequence is rear slides, rider responds by shifting weight, tire grips, machine upright snaps, rider is launched. The kinetic energy that was being absorbed by the slide is suddenly redirected into the rider's body, and the resulting trajectory can be severe enough to produce injuries at relatively modest speeds. High-side crashes account for a disproportionate share of serious injuries in motorcycle racing compared to other crash types. The mitigation is consistent with the mitigation for most motorcycle accidents: skilled tire management, appropriate speed for conditions, and gear that can handle the consequences of the unexpected. None of this prevents the physics. It just improves the odds. The specific quality of attention that long-distance motorcycle riding produces in experienced riders has been described by many of them in terms that overlap substantially with descriptions of contemplative practice. Not meditation in a formal religious sense, but something adjacent to it. The requirement to remain present and focused over long hours, the physical rhythm of the road, the way the mind empties of specific concerns and fills instead with a kind of background processing that feels cleaner and clearer than ordinary thinking. Riders who have done extended journeys alone frequently describe arriving at destinations with a sense of having worked something out that they hadn't consciously been working on. The road appears to do something to the thinking mind that indoor rest does not. Whether this is a function of the physical demands, the sensory environment, the particular type of attention that riding requires, or some combination of all three, is not something that has been fully resolved in the research. What is consistent is that the people who have experienced it keep going back to find it again. And that's where we leave the road for tonight's first half of the journey. The engine's still warm, the horizon's still out there, and there's more waiting in the second half of this ride. Stay comfortable, stay with it. The night is long and the road is still wide open. The motorcycle sidecar is one of the most underappreciated configurations in the history of personal transportation. Sidecars were attached to motorcycles in significant numbers from the 1910s onward, and through the 1920s and 1930s, the sidecar combination was a legitimate family transportation solution for people who could not afford a car, but needed more carrying capacity than a solo motorcycle provided. The physics of a sidecar outfit are entirely different from a solo motorcycle, and riders who transition between the two without specific training for the sidecar configuration frequently have significant difficulties. A sidecar outfit does not lean into corners the way a solo motorcycle does. It pushes. The steering inputs required are the opposite of what solo motorcycle experience teaches. There is a moment during the learning process where everything the experienced solo rider knows becomes actively counterproductive, and that moment has surprised a great many confident people. Sidecar racing, which involves the passenger shifting their body weight dramatically in and out of the outfit during cornering to manage the dynamics, is one of the most physically demanding forms of motorsport at the amateur level, requiring the precision teamwork of two people managing a machine that is actively trying to do something neither of them wants. The color red is associated with speed and performance across motorcycle culture in a way that has a traceable historical origin. The association between red and speed in motorsport generally traces partly to the traditional racing color assigned to Italy in international motor racing from the early 20th century. Italian racing red, the color of Ferrari in Formula One and of Ducati in superbike racing, became associated with the fastest and most technically sophisticated racing machines of several generations. The emotional response to red on a motorcycle is not purely aesthetic. It is conditioned by decades of visual association between that specific color and the fastest things on 2 and 4 wheels. This is why manufacturers of performance-oriented motorcycles consistently use red as a primary colorway or as the color of their top specification models. The color is marketing, but the marketing works because the association is real and deeply embedded. The record for the highest speed on a motorcycle in a standing mile acceleration event is currently in excess of 280 miles per hour, achieved in a category that uses turbocharged and nitrous oxide-assisted engines in fully enclosed, streamlined bodywork. The riders in these events lie completely prone inside the fairing, feet at the back, head at the front, controlling the machine through a combination of handlebars positioned below their chest and foot controls that they cannot see. They accelerate from a standing start, pass through the measured mile, and then deploy a parachute to decelerate. The entire event takes less than 15 seconds. In those 15 seconds, the rider experiences something that very few human beings have experienced, and that is essentially impossible to describe adequately to someone who hasn't done it. The closest analogy that participants consistently offer is not a faster version of a normal motorcycle ride. It is something categorically different, a compression of physics and time and commitment that exists in its own experiential register. Motorcycle culture has produced an extraordinary volume of literature, and not only of the genre-specific variety. Robert Pirsig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, published in 1974, was rejected by 121 publishers before William Morrow accepted it. It went on to sell more than 5 million copies and is still in print more than 50 years after publication. Pirsig's book is not primarily a book about motorcycles, just as Moby Dick is not primarily a book about whales. The motorcycle is the vehicle for a philosophical inquiry into quality, technology, and the divided nature of modern consciousness. But the writing is real, the roots are real, and the specific sensory details of long-distance touring that Pirsig describes with extraordinary accuracy are part of why the book resonated so widely with riders who had felt the same things on the same kinds of roads and never had language for it before. The book gave a generation of riders permission to think of what they were doing as something more than leisure. It gave the ride a philosophical weight that matched what many of them had privately been feeling for years. The art of motorcycle cornering at the limit of traction is built on a counterintuitive input. To turn a motorcycle at speed, the correct input is not to push the handlebar in the direction you want to turn. The correct input is to push the handlebar away from the direction you want to turn, which causes the bike to lean into the turn, and the resulting lean initiates the arc. This technique is called counter-steering, and it is the fundamental steering mechanism of any two-wheeled vehicle above approximately 15 miles per hour. New riders typically stumble onto it by instinct, without consciously recognizing what they are doing. Experienced riders use it deliberately and with precision. The discovery that you have been doing something correctly without understanding it is one of the more interesting moments in the development of any skilled practitioner, and the recognition of counter-steering for what it actually is tends to mark a specific transition in a rider's relationship with their motorcycle. Before the understanding, the riding is intuitive but opaque. After it, the riding is intuitive and legible. The machine is still doing the same things. The rider is finally reading the language. There are approximately 180,000 people who ride motorcycles in Iceland, which is remarkable given that Iceland has a total population of approximately 370,000 and a climate that makes year-round riding essentially theoretical. The Icelandic motorcycle culture is therefore concentrated into an extremely short riding season, typically May through September, and practiced with an intensity that reflects the scarcity of the opportunity. Icelandic riders are among the most weatherproof in the world by necessity. The combination of volcanic landscape, unpaved highland roads, dramatic coastal scenery, and the particular quality of subarctic light in summer creates riding conditions that are unlike anything available in the temperate zones. The F-roads, the highland tracks that cross the central volcanic plateau, are only accessible in high summer and only to vehicles with appropriate clearance and capability. Motorcycles capable of navigating them, large-capacity adventure bikes with long suspension travel and knobby tires, have become a significant presence on those routes, and the riders who complete them report experiences that are consistently described as among the most significant of their riding lives. Iceland doesn't give these things away easily. That's part of why they mean something. The motorcycle dispatch riders of the Second World War, who operated in the Pacific Theater, faced conditions so different from their European counterparts that they might as well have been practicing a different occupation. In Europe, the primary challenges were cold, mud, and artillery. In the Pacific, the challenges were heat, humidity, jungle terrain, and the biological reality of operating mechanical equipment in an environment that seemed specifically designed to dissolve metal and rot rubber. Motorcycles in the Pacific Campaign required constant maintenance that European theater riders would not have recognized as routine. Chains corroded in days, rubber components degraded in weeks. Engines required cleaning and adjustment at intervals that would have seemed excessive to any peacetime mechanic. The riders who kept their machines running in those conditions were, by necessity, mechanics first and riders second, and the engineering knowledge they accumulated in the field fed directly back into the peacetime motorcycle industry when they came home. A significant number of the engineers and technicians who shaped American motorcycle design in the late 1940s and 1950s had spent the preceding years figuring out how to keep a machine alive in conditions that should have killed it. That education cost something. It also produced something. The speed wobble, sometimes called a tank slapper, is one of the most terrifying experiences available to a motorcycle rider who does not specifically seek terror. It occurs when the front wheel of a motorcycle begins oscillating rapidly from side to side at a frequency that the rider cannot easily damp with handlebar inputs. The handlebars slam back and forth fast enough that holding on can dislocate a rider's thumbs. The cause is typically a resonance between the steering geometry, suspension compliance, and the speed of travel, triggered by a surface irregularity or a sudden change in load. Modern motorcycles have steering dampers fitted specifically to prevent speed wobble from developing, and the progressive improvement in steering damper technology across the past 3 decades has made the phenomenon significantly rarer than it was in the 1970s and 1980s. Riders of that era, particularly those who rode high-powered 2-stroke machines with handling that contemporary road testers described in terms that now read as quietly heroic understatement, encountered speed wobbles with enough regularity that the correct response was something many of them had practiced. The correct response is to not fight the bars, to roll off the throttle smoothly, and to resist every instinct the situation is producing. This is easier to describe than to execute when the bars are trying to remove your thumbs at 120 miles per hour. The Tour de France, the world's most famous cycling race, was originally promoted by a motorcycle magazine. Lotto, the French sports daily that organized the first tour in 1903, was a publication that covered cycling, motoring, and motorsport, and its founder, Henri Desgrange, saw the tour primarily as a circulation stunt. The vehicles that followed and supported the tour in those earliest editions were motorcycles, ridden by journalists and officials who needed to keep pace with the peloton. The relationship between cycling and motorcycle culture at the sport's organizational origins is rarely discussed in the context of either sport's history, but it is genuine. The people who built the infrastructure for what became the world's most watched annual sporting event were, in the first instance, people who rode motorcycles, and the motorcycle was the tool that made following a bicycle race across France practically possible before the automobile was reliable enough for the purpose. The Tour has been followed by cars for most of its history, but it started with motorcycles. There is a style of motorcycle modification called rat bike that is, philosophically, one of the most honest aesthetic positions in custom motorcycle culture. A rat bike is not a project that has been abandoned partway through. It is a deliberate choice to accumulate wear, modification, and patina without concern for cosmetic finish, operating on the principle that a functional machine that shows its history honestly is more authentic than a restored or customized machine that conceals its origins behind polish and paint. Rat bike culture is explicit about this philosophy. Riders within it are frequently articulate about the distinction between a rat bike and a neglected motorcycle, the former being maintained mechanically to a high standard while presenting deliberately rough externally, the latter simply being left to deteriorate. The best rat bikes are machines that have been ridden extensively and maintained carefully, and that look like exactly what they are, which is objects that have been lived with rather than preserved. They are the motorcycle equivalent of a working tool that shows honest use, and the people who build them are making a specific statement about what they think motorcycles are for. The relationship between tire pressure and handling in motorcycles is more sensitive and more consequential than most casual riders appreciate. A tire running 5 pounds per square inch below its recommended pressure will handle measurably differently, with increased steering weight, different cornering feel, and altered braking characteristics. Running 5 pounds per square inch below recommendation also generates significantly more heat in the tire carcass, accelerating wear, and in extreme cases, producing enough heat to compromise the structural integrity of the tire. The handling differences are subtle enough that many riders do not notice them consciously, but experienced riders and race technicians will tell you that they can feel a pressure change of 2 or 3 pounds per square inch in the way a bike responds to cornering inputs. This is one of the reasons that professional racing teams check tire pressures before every session rather than daily. The ambient temperature, the time of day, and the distance from the previous run all affect the starting pressure of a tire, and the difference between optimal and suboptimal is a difference that shows up in lap times and in the confidence a rider can carry into a corner. Tire pressure is one of the cheapest and most accessible maintenance items available to any rider. It is also one of the most consistently neglected. The sound of a two-stroke motorcycle engine at full throttle is produced by a resonance that is carefully engineered rather than accidental. The expansion chamber exhaust system of a high-performance two-stroke engine is designed using the physics of pressure waves traveling through the exhaust pipe to create a supercharging effect in the engine's cylinder. When the exhaust port opens in a two-stroke engine, the burned gas exits and a pressure wave travels down the exhaust pipe. If the pipe length and geometry are correctly calculated, the reflected pressure wave returns to the exhaust port at precisely the right moment to push unburned fuel mixture back into the cylinder before the port closes, effectively charging the cylinder beyond atmospheric pressure. This is called exhaust pipe resonance tuning, and it is why two-stroke engines, in their peak tune, produce power figures that their displacement alone would suggest are impossible. It is also why the power band of a high-performance two-stroke is so narrow and so sudden, the engine only supercharges itself efficiently within a specific rev range, and below that range, it is comparatively weak. The sound that results from this system under full power is a specific, shrieking wail that two-stroke enthusiasts describe with the kind of reverence usually applied to music. It is not a comfortable sound. It is an exhilarating one, and the people who love it are not wrong to love it. The record for the most countries visited by motorcycle in a single journey is held by Tiffany Coates, a British rider who visited 77 countries over the course of a journey that took several years and covered routes across Europe, Asia, the Americas, and Africa. Her journey required navigating border crossings with bureaucratic processes that are among the most challenging aspects of long-distance motorcycle travel, obtaining visas and carnet documents for the motorcycle in countries where the administrative infrastructure for international vehicle travel is minimal, and managing the mechanical health of a motorcycle across climates and road surfaces that cover essentially the full range of what the planet offers. The motorcycle she rode was not an exotic machine. It was a standard mid-displacement adventure bike of the kind sold in large numbers to commuters and recreational riders. The extraordinary part of the journey was not the machine. It was the sustained commitment of the person on it, and the specific kind of problem-solving intelligence that long-distance motorcycle travel develops in the people who pursue it seriously. Motorcycle saddlebags have a history that predates the motorcycle itself. The design of leather saddlebags as carried objects draped over a mount dates to horse travel, and the first motorcycle saddlebags were literally repurposed horse saddlebags adapted to fit over the rear mudguard of early motorcycles. The lineage from horse to motorcycle in this specific piece of equipment is unbroken and visible, which is one of the more interesting material culture connections between the pre-industrial transportation world and the early mechanical one. The modern hard luggage systems fitted to touring motorcycles are technically very different from their leather ancestors, but occupy the same function and the same physical position, and the aesthetic language of panniers and top boxes still refers back, in some residual way, to the days when what carried your belongings was a horse, and the bag that draped over it was made of the skin of another animal. There is an enormous distance between those two objects, and almost no conceptual distance at all. If you've been drifting in and out through this ride, that's exactly right. Let the facts wash over you. But if you're still here, and these long nights of motorcycle knowledge are your kind of company, subscribe to the channel. There's no pressure, just more of this whenever you want it. The enduro motorcycle discipline, where riders compete across hundreds of kilometers of natural terrain over multiple days, places demands on machine reliability that are fundamentally different from any other form of motorcycle competition. An enduro machine that breaks down in a remote section, of course, leaves its rider in a situation where self-rescue may require carrying the motorcycle significant distances on foot, and where the mechanical knowledge required to perform roadside repairs with limited tools in difficult conditions is not a supplementary skill, but a core competency. The most successful enduro riders in history have consistently been described by their mechanics and team managers as people who could rebuild significant portions of their motorcycles from basic materials if the situation demanded it. The relationship between enduro culture and practical mechanical knowledge is direct and unbroken in a way that is increasingly unusual in a world where motorcycles are electronically sophisticated enough that self-maintenance is discouraged and sometimes practically impossible without dealer-level diagnostic tools. Enduro is one of the places where the motorcycle remains an object that a skilled human can fully understand and repair with hands and intelligence rather than software. The way a motorcycle fork works under braking is the subject of ongoing engineering debate that has produced several competing and genuinely different design philosophies among major manufacturers. The conventional telescopic fork, which has been the dominant front suspension design on motorcycles for decades, dives under braking load, compressing as the weight transfers forward. This dive changes the geometry of the front end, shortening the wheelbase, steepening the head angle, and altering the handling characteristics of the bike at the moment when precise control is most important. Manufacturers have addressed this through cartridge forks with progressive spring rates, through anti-dive mechanisms of various designs, and through alternative front suspension geometries including hub center steering, telelever, and duo-lever systems. BMW and Bimota have used non-conventional front-end designs for decades, and the technical case for them is well made. The conventional telescopic fork has survived not primarily because it is the best engineering solution to the problem, but because it is the most widely understood, the most widely manufactured, the most easily serviced, and the most familiar to the riding public. The best engineering solution and the most successful commercial solution are the same thing remarkably rarely. The word throttle itself comes from the Old English throttle, meaning throat, and in its original mechanical sense referred to a valve that controlled the flow of steam in early industrial engines, named by analogy to the throat's role in controlling the flow of breath and voice. The connection between the word and the human body has always been there, even if it has been forgotten by the millions of people who twist a motorcycle throttle every day without thinking about why it is called that. Language carries history inside it in the same way that old machines carry the decisions of the people who designed them, and both kinds of history become invisible through familiarity. The person who named the throttle valve was almost certainly aware of the analogy they were making. The engineer who later adapted the term to the control on a motorcycle was probably not thinking about it at all. The word traveled from a human body to a steam engine to an internal combustion engine to your right hand on the bars, and it arrived without anyone having to carry it deliberately. The practice of lane splitting, where motorcycles move at low speed through stationary traffic, is legal in California and in most of Europe and Asia, and the debate about it in jurisdictions where it remains illegal is one of the most consistent and low-level arguments in motorcycle advocacy. The case against it is generally framed in terms of unpredictability and the potential for drivers who are not expecting a motorcycle between lanes to open a door or shift position and create a collision. The case for it is framed in the safety research showing reduced rear-end accidents for motorcycles in traffic, plus the practical reduction in overall traffic congestion that results when motorcycles are not occupying the same space as cars. The California Highway Patrol, after years of ambiguity about the practice, developed formal guidelines in 2016 recommending that lane splitting should not be practiced at speeds more than 10 miles per hour above surrounding traffic and not at traffic speeds above 30 miles per hour. These are guidelines rather than law, but they represent the most concrete official acknowledgement in the United States that lane splitting, when practiced within reasonable parameters, is not inherently dangerous. The argument elsewhere continues. The Motorcycle Safety Foundation in the United States estimates that approximately 90% of motorcyclists involved in accidents are either self-taught or receive training from friends and family rather than formal instruction. The correlation between the absence of formal training and accident involvement is strong enough that it has informed mandatory training requirements in most European countries and many Asian countries, where new riders are required to complete formal instruction and pass structured tests before being licensed. The American system, which varies significantly by state, generally requires passing a basic knowledge test and a skills test that many experienced riders describe as insufficient to verify competence for real-world conditions. The MSF Basic Rider Course, a widely available and affordable formal training program, produces measurably better outcomes in the riders who complete it compared to those who do not. The training is available. The take-up is voluntary. The gap between what is available and what is practiced is one of the persistent frustrations of motorcycle safety advocates who have the data and cannot make it compulsory. There is a remote valley in northern Norway where a motorcycle gathering called the Arctic Bike Week draws riders from across Scandinavia and northern Europe every summer to ride in conditions that most of the world's riders will never experience. The midnight sun, the near-permanent daylight of a Norwegian summer above the Arctic Circle, creates a riding environment that disorients the body clock in ways that are initially confusing and eventually liberating. Riders arrive and depart at hours that feel wrong and look like noon, eating dinner at midnight in full daylight, sleeping when the body insists rather than when the clock suggests. The roads in northern Norway are extraordinary, running through fjord landscapes that have no adequate description in the vocabulary available to someone who has not seen them. The quality of the light in midsummer at those latitudes is something that photographers travel specifically to capture, and that motorcycle riders who experience it directly and continuously through the hours of a long day carry as a specific kind of memory that does not fade the way photographic memories sometimes do. The particular attachment that riders form to specific motorcycles is not simply sentimentality, though sentimentality plays a role. Motorcycles are objects that require active engagement to operate, which means the rider's relationship with a specific machine is built through doing rather than through passive association. The bike that taught you a specific corner, the one you rode through a specific storm, the one that broke down in a specific place and required a specific ingenuity to get moving again. These experiences accumulate in the machine as much as in the rider, or at least that is how riders experience it. The rational account of this is that the memories are stored in the rider, and the machine is simply the object that cues them. The experiential account is that the machine itself carries something. Motorcyclists who sell bikes they have ridden extensively frequently describe the sale as something closer to a departure than a transaction, and many of them buy the bike back years later when they find that the replacement has not quite filled the same space. The space, it turns out, was specific to the machine. The development of the modern motorcycle helmet followed a path that was significantly influenced by the research of a single individual. Dr. C.F. Lombard, a professor at the University of Southern California, began studying head injury protection in the 1950s and published research on the relationship between shell stiffness, liner material, and the forces transmitted to the skull in an impact. His work was taken up and extended by Pete Snell, an amateur racing driver who died from head injuries in a racing accident in 1956. Snell's friends and colleagues established the Snell Memorial Foundation in his memory, and the foundation began developing and publishing helmet safety standards that went significantly beyond the minimum requirements of government certification. The Snell standard became, for decades, the benchmark that serious motorcycle riders looked for on a helmet they trusted their lives to, more demanding than DOT certification and independently verified by a foundation with no commercial relationship to helmet manufacturers. The Snell Memorial Foundation still exists. The standards it publishes are still considered the most demanding in the consumer market. The whole apparatus was built because someone died, and the people who knew him decided to do something about it. Motorcycle sidecars were used as ambulances in the First World War, fitted with a stretcher arrangement that allowed the wounded to be transported across terrain where conventional wheeled ambulances could not follow. The sidecar ambulance was not a comfortable way to transport a seriously injured person. The roads, where roads existed at all, transmitted every surface irregularity directly through the sidecar's rigid attachment to the motorcycle. The alternative was a stretcher carried by 4 men on foot, which was slower and exposed those 4 men to the same fire that had wounded the person on the stretcher. The motorcycle sidecar ambulance was, in context, a significant humanitarian improvement over what preceded it, even if it would not survive comparison to any modern standard. The medical personnel who rode in those combinations and the riders who drove them worked in conditions that are genuinely difficult to imagine from the distance of a century. The machines were simple. The demands placed on them were not. The drag coefficient of a motorcycle and rider in a standard upright riding position is approximately 0.9, compared to approximately 0.35 for a modern passenger car. This means a motorcycle in a typical riding position creates dramatically more aerodynamic drag relative to its frontal area than a car does, which is a significant contributor to fuel consumption at higher speeds. A rider in a full racing tuck, chest on the tank and body as flat as possible, reduces the drag coefficient substantially, which is why racing crouched riders on sport bikes achieve meaningfully better fuel economy at highway speeds than the same rider sitting upright. The wind resistance that a motorcycle rider experiences at 70 miles per hour is not just uncomfortable. It is doing measurable work against the forward progress of the machine, and the effort required to overcome it is reflected in every fuel stop calculation. Aerodynamic motorcycle gear, including one-piece leathers, full-face helmets, and tucked riding positions, is not only about safety. It is a genuine engagement with physics. The motorcycle, as a cultural symbol in American popular music, goes back considerably further than the rock and roll era. Blues musicians of the 1920s and 1930s wrote and recorded songs about motorcycles, trains, and automobiles as symbols of mobility and freedom in a cultural context where the ability to move freely was not something that could be taken for granted by everyone. Robert Johnson, Son House, and other Delta blues musicians referenced machines of speed and movement in ways that connected the personal desire for freedom to the physical capability of a machine. The motorcycle, as a rock and roll symbol, which arrived fully formed with the birth of that genre in the 1950s, was built on a foundation laid by musicians who were expressing the same desire under considerably more difficult circumstances. The rebel on a motorcycle is a recurring archetype in American music, not because motorcycles are inherently rebellious, but because they are associated at a deep cultural level with the ability to go somewhere else. And going somewhere else has always been a response to somewhere here being insufficient. The gyroscopic force produced by a spinning motorcycle wheel is real and measurable, but its contribution to the self-stabilizing behavior of a ridden motorcycle is much smaller than most people assume, as mentioned earlier in tonight's ride. What is less commonly discussed is that the gyroscopic force of a spinning wheel actively resists the lean inputs that make cornering possible. When a rider countersteers and initiates a lean, the gyroscopic resistance of both wheels must be overcome to initiate the lean angle change. At higher speeds, where wheel spin is faster, this resistance is greater, which is one of the reasons that cornering inputs must be applied with more authority at speed. The rider who has only ever ridden slowly cannot simply ride faster and expect the bike to respond as it did at lower speeds. The physics are literally different. The gyroscopic forces are larger, and the inputs required to manage them are correspondingly more deliberate. This is one of the underlying reasons why experienced high-speed riders develop the characteristic firmness of input that is sometimes described as riding aggressively. It is not aggression. It is the force required to communicate effectively with a gyroscopically stabilized object moving at speed. There is a community of riders in Japan who practice an art form called maneji, or decorative motorcycle presentation, distinct from either racing culture or customization culture, in which machines are built and displayed as aesthetic objects in the tradition of Japanese decorative craft. These machines are often not ridden at all. They are constructed from motorcycle components and modified with handcrafted metalwork, lacquered finishes, and decorative details that place them closer to sculpture than to transportation. The community around this practice is small, the practitioners are highly skilled, and the machines they produce are occasionally entered into international custom shows, where they consistently confuse judging panels accustomed to evaluating machines by criteria that assume the object will at some point be ridden. The question of whether a motorcycle that is never ridden is still a motorcycle is not one these builders find particularly urgent. They are making something beautiful from materials that have their own history and aesthetic vocabulary, and the result speaks for itself regardless of how it is categorized. The smell of a new motorcycle tire has a specific chemical origin that is distinct from the smell of a worn tire. New tires contain release compounds that are applied during the manufacturing process to prevent the tire from bonding to the mold in which it is formed. These compounds coat the surface of the tire and are responsible for both its distinctive smell and its reduced initial grip. Riders are generally advised to treat new tires with particular care for the first 100 miles or so of use, during which these release compounds are worn away by contact with the road surface. The phenomenon of a new tire being slippery, which has contributed to accidents among riders who did not know to expect it, is directly caused by this manufacturing residue. The smell that accompanies a freshly unboxed tire, which motorcycle enthusiasts find distinctly pleasant, is essentially the smell of a chemical lubricant that you are about to spend the first few rides removing. This is a mild irony that the tire industry has been living with for as long as tires have been molded. Let the engine idle for a moment there. If the sound of all this is the right frequency for your end of day, subscribe and stay on the channel. These long rides go on as long as you need them to. The Tour de France's relationship with motorcycles was mentioned earlier in this journey, but the specific role of motorcycles in professional cycling today deserves its own attention. The lead motorcycle in the Tour de France is ridden by a race official who carries the race director and who is responsible for managing the overall progression of the race, calling decisions about weather, road hazards, and the behavior of following vehicles. The press motorcycles, which carry photographers and television camera operators who film the race in progress, are ridden by professional motorcycle pilots who must maintain precise speeds and positions relative to the cyclists they are filming, while simultaneously managing their own safety and the safety of those around them. These riders are among the most skilled and least recognized motorcycle pilots in any professional capacity. They work in dense, fast-moving environments where the consequences of an error affect not only themselves, but the athletes around them. The skill required is significant, the training is extensive, and the public recognition is essentially zero. The Morgan Motor Company, the British sports car manufacturer, built a three-wheeled vehicle for most of the first half of the 20th century that used a motorcycle engine as its power source. The Morgan Runabout, later known as the Morgan three-wheeler, placed a V-twin motorcycle engine at the front of a narrow three-wheeled body, with the engine exposed and air-cooled in the manner of the motorcycle engines it borrowed from. The sound, the smell, and the overall character of these machines were as much motorcycle as they were car, and the people who drove them experienced something that occupied the space between the two categories in ways that neither category fully captured. Morgan revived the concept in 2011 with a modern three-wheeler using a Harley-Davidson V-twin engine, and the response from buyers was enthusiastic enough to confirm that what the original Morgan offered, that particular kind of open, mechanical, between two worlds experience, remains appealing to people for reasons that are not fully reducible to practicality or performance. There is something about the experience that cannot be substituted. The history of women's motorcycle racing is longer than most people know and more distinguished than most motorcycle history books record. Gwen Kershaw, who raced motorcycles in Britain in the 1920s and 1930s, competed in events alongside male riders and achieved results that were not noted as unusual by the sports press of the era. Dorothy Levitt, who preceded her, was a racing driver and speed record holder in both cars and motorcycles in the early 1900s, who held the title of fastest woman on Earth for several years. In the post-war era, women motorcycle racers were progressively separated from men in competitive classifications, a development that was framed as protective but which had the practical effect of making women's achievements less visible and their competition less consequential to the mainstream audience. The reintegration of women into open-class competition in various forms of motorcycle racing in recent decades has been uneven and slow, and the structural barriers remain significant. The women who have overcome them have done so against a resistance that is rarely acknowledged honestly by the institutions that built it. The act of riding a motorcycle through a tunnel produces a sound experience that is unlike any other riding environment. The exhaust note, which dissipates into open air on normal roads, reflects from the tunnel walls and amplifies, returning to the rider as a full-dimensional sound that surrounds rather than projects. Riders who open the throttle in a tunnel are not simply making more noise. They are conducting an involuntary acoustic experiment in a cylindrical resonator, and the result is a quality of sound that can be objectively measured as louder and subjectively experienced as something that occupies the chest as well as the ears. This is why motorcycle riders in tunnels accelerate more than the same riders on open roads. It is not entirely a matter of lack of visibility from speed cameras. It is partly the sound. The tunnel gives back the engine note in a form that is more complete than open air allows, and the human response to that fullness is to want more of it. The tunnel makes the music louder. The rider reaches for the volume. The relationship between motorcycle design and aircraft design has been close and mutually influential since the early years of both industries. The streamlined aluminum bodywork that characterized the land speed record motorcycles of the 1950s borrowed directly from aircraft fuselage design principles. The magnesium alloy components used in high-performance motorcycle engines of the same era were drawn from the aviation materials industry. In the modern era, the aerodynamic research conducted by MotoGP teams uses wind tunnel technology and computational fluid dynamics methods that are directly descended from aerospace engineering practice. The engineers who move between aerospace and motorcycle racing, a movement that is common in the engineering labor market, carry knowledge between disciplines in both directions, and the results show in the performance of the machines they touch. A modern MotoGP motorcycle is not built like an aircraft, but the people who built its wings and fairings understand aerodynamics in a way that was only made possible by a century of people trying to make things fly. The specific blue color of the sky, as seen from a motorcycle at speed on a clear day, is not substantially different from the sky seen through a car window, but the experience of it is. This is not a physical difference in the light. It is a perceptual difference produced by the combination of motion, exposure, and the absence of the frame that a vehicle window imposes. Through a car window, the sky is a rectangle. On a motorcycle, it is everything above the horizon, changing continuously as the road bends and rises and falls, and the rider's body moves within it rather than being protected from it. The wind that carries the blue sky also carries the temperature and smell of the air, and the combination of visual and physical information arriving simultaneously creates a sensory experience that is categorically richer than looking through glass. This is one of the things that riders mean when they describe riding as feeling more alive than driving. The information density of the experience is genuinely higher. More of the world reaches you at once. The oldest surviving operational motorcycle race circuit in the world is Brooklands in Surrey, England, which opened in 1907 as the world's first purpose-built motor racing venue. The banked oval track, constructed from concrete at enormous expense for its era, hosted motorcycle racing from its opening year and saw world speed records set on its banked curves through the 1920s and 1930s. The circuit was requisitioned for military use during the Second World War and never returned to racing afterward, but the concrete banking still stands, preserved as a heritage site, and the Brooklands Museum on the site contains one of the most significant collections of motorcycle and automobile racing history in Britain. Standing on the surviving section of banking at Brooklands is a specific physical experience. The gradient is steeper than photographs suggest, and the concrete is worn by the wheels of machines that have been gone for 80 years. The history is literal and underfoot, and the people who visit it are standing where the world was first learning what speed meant. The word motorcycle itself is a compound of motor and cycle, cycle being a shortening of bicycle, which in turn comes from the Latin bis, meaning twice, and the Greek kyklos, meaning circle or wheel, making bicycle literally two-wheeled and motorcycle literally an engine-powered two-wheeled vehicle. The word entered common use in English in the 1890s, around the same time that the machines themselves were becoming common enough to require naming. Before the compound word stabilized, early machines were called motor bicycles, autocycles, velocipedes, motorized cycles, and a range of other compound terms that reflect the uncertainty of a culture encountering a genuinely new object and reaching for the nearest existing vocabulary to describe it. The word motorcycle won not because it was the most accurate or the most elegant option, but because it was short, combinable with other words, and useful in headlines. Language choices in naming technologies are rarely made on aesthetic grounds. They are made by the people writing about the things under deadline, and the words that survive are often the ones that fit the space available. The longest traffic jam in history that specifically involved a majority of motorcycle traffic occurred in Indonesia in 2019 during the Lebaran holiday period, when an estimated 3.5 million motorcycle riders left Jakarta simultaneously to return to their home villages for the Eid al-Fitr celebration. The convoy of motorcycles extended for hundreds of kilometers along Indonesian highways, moving at speeds that were frequently reduced to walking pace, with riders carrying luggage, children, and household goods balanced in configurations that would be impossible to describe without photographs. The annual Lebaran motorcycle migration in Indonesia is one of the largest regular mass movements of people by motorcycle in the world, and it represents something that has no equivalent in the motorcycle cultures of Europe or North America. It is not recreational riding, it is not commuting. It is a cultural event in which the motorcycle is the vehicle of a collective ritual, and the motorcycles themselves are present in numbers that make the landscape, literally, a different color than it is in any other week of the year. Grip gloves for motorcycle riding were not developed specifically for motorcycles. The leather gauntlet glove, which is the direct ancestor of the modern motorcycle glove, was designed for falconry in medieval Europe, where thick leather protection for the hand and forearm was required to manage large raptors. The progression from falconry glove to equestrian glove to early motorcycling glove is traceable in surviving material culture, and the basic design principle, a heavy leather palm and protective cuff, has remained essentially constant from medieval falconry to modern motorcycle racing. What has changed is the material science, the protective inserts for knuckles and palms, the closure systems, and the ventilation. The fundamental geometry of the human hand and the fundamental requirement to protect it while maintaining control of something have not changed. The glove is an ancient object that has followed the human hand through every technology it has needed to manage. The physics of a motorcycle at the moment of impact in a collision are sufficiently well understood that crash investigators can reconstruct the speed, direction, and sequence of events in a motorcycle accident with a precision that would surprise most riders. Tire marks, gouges in the road surface, the deformation patterns of the machine, the distribution of debris, and the injuries to the rider each carry specific information about the energy and geometry of the impact. The science of motorcycle accident reconstruction has developed over the past 40 years into a formal discipline practiced by engineers who testify in legal proceedings, and the accuracy of well-executed reconstruction analysis is high enough that it has settled insurance disputes and criminal cases where the parties' accounts of events were entirely contradictory. The road tells a story after every accident, and the people who know how to read it can tell you almost exactly what happened. This is not always welcome information, but it is almost always accurate. The mountain passes of the Pyrenees between France and Spain are among the most demanding and most celebrated motorcycle roads in Europe, and they are also among the most historically significant. The Tour de France climbs them, The route Napoleon, one of the historically named roads of the continent, crosses them, and in the periods of the Spanish Civil War and the Second World War, the mule tracks and high passes of the Pyrenees were the routes through which refugees, resistance fighters, and Allied airmen crossed from occupied France into neutral Spain. Some of those crossings were made by motorcycle, in conditions that no tourist on a summer ride encounters, in darkness, under threat, with consequences for failure that the present-day recreational rider cannot reasonably imagine while enjoying the same bends and the same altitude. The mountains are the same. The roads are better. The circumstances are incomparably different. History sits underneath the asphalt of these passes the way it sits underneath everything that mattered, quiet and permanent, and available to anyone who thinks to look for it. The modern adventure motorcycle category, machines designed to be ridden on a combination of paved and unpaved surfaces across long distances and in varied conditions, did not emerge from motorcycle culture. It emerged from the specific requirements of people who were attempting journeys that existing motorcycle categories could not support. The BMW R80 GS, introduced in 1980, is generally credited as the first purpose-built adventure motorcycle in the modern sense, developed partly in response to the requirements of the Paris-Dakar Rally, which had begun in 1979, and which represented a form of motorcycle travel that existing off-road racing machines and touring machines were each inadequate to support on their own. The GS designation stands for Gelände und Straße, German for off-road and road, and the design philosophy behind the first GS has remained the defining philosophy of the category ever since. A machine that can do enough on unpaved surfaces to go places that paved-only machines cannot reach, while remaining comfortable and capable on the paved roads that connect those places. The category has grown from that specific origin into the largest selling segment of the motorcycle market in most developed countries. The people who ride adventure motorcycles are, in principle, if not always in practice, riding something that was designed with a very specific and ambitious intention about where it might go. The tire tracks left by a motorcycle on a dusty road carry more information than they appear to. The width of the tire contact patch tells you the load and pressure. The pattern of the track through a corner tells you the lean angle and the throttle state. A track that shows a narrow contact patch widening suddenly indicates hard braking. A track that wanders slightly tells you something about the rider's attention. A track that cuts through loose gravel without sliding tells you about the tire compound and the skill of the person navigating it. Experienced trail riders and tracking experts can read motorcycle tire marks with the same fluency that skilled naturalists read animal tracks, and the information they extract tells a story about a machine and a person that neither left intentionally. The road keeps a record of everything that passes over it in a language that takes patience to learn and rewards attention with specific knowledge. This is true of tracks in dust, tracks in mud, tracks in snow, and, with the right knowledge, tracks in asphalt itself, which deforms under heavy loads in ways that carry information about the vehicles that have used the road repeatedly over time. The motorcycle film genre in India, which is not widely known outside of South Asia, is a substantial body of cinematic work in which motorcycles function not as props or background elements, but as central narrative devices around which questions of masculinity, aspiration, belonging, and freedom are organized. Indian cinema produces more films per year than Hollywood, and the proportion of those films in which a motorcycle figures prominently in at least one major sequence is large enough to represent a genuine cultural pattern. The hero on a motorcycle in Indian cinema carries a specific set of associations that are distinct from the associations the same image carries in American or European cinema, reflecting a society in which the motorcycle represents aspiration and economic arrival, rather than rebellion and escape. The machine means something different depending on the context it inhabits, and the Indian motorcycle film is one of the more interesting illustrations of the principle that objects do not carry fixed cultural meanings. They carry meanings assigned by the cultures that use them. There is a specific type of motorcycle ride that experienced riders describe as therapeutic in a way that is different from the general stress-reducing effect of riding. It is the night ride, preferably alone, on roads that are known well enough to be ridden without conscious navigation, at a pace that is below the limit of the machine but above the threshold of engagement. The night provides a specific kind of privacy that daytime riding does not. There are fewer vehicles. The world contracts to the cone of the headlight and the sounds of the engine and the wind. Other concerns do not disappear, but they lose their urgency in a way that is difficult to achieve in any stationary environment. Experienced riders have a term for the state this produces, though the term varies by culture and country. The Japanese motorcycle community uses the phrase hashiri no michi, the path of riding, to describe the practice of riding as a form of moving contemplation. The American idiom tends toward more practical language, clearing your head or burning it off, but the underlying experience being described is recognizably the same thing in any language. The road takes something from you that you were carrying unnecessarily and gives back the clarity that was always underneath it. The relationship between a motorcycle frame and the engine it contains is not simply structural. The frame is a tuned component whose flex characteristics, torsional stiffness, and geometry are as deliberately designed as the engine's power delivery. A frame that is too rigid transmits every road surface irregularity directly to the rider without filtering, making the machine feel harsh and tiring over distance. A frame that flexes too much provides imprecise handling feedback and makes the machine feel vague and unpredictable in corners. The ideal is a frame with carefully calibrated compliance, stiff enough to communicate what the tires are doing, but flexible enough to absorb minor surface variations without transmitting them fully to the rider. The development of aluminum twin spar frames in the 1980s and 1990s represented a significant advance in frame engineering, allowing designers to build compliance into specific axes of the frame while maintaining stiffness in others. The result was machines that were both more precise and more comfortable than their steel-framed predecessors, not because they were stiffer, but because they were stiff and compliant in the right places simultaneously. The Pacific Northwest of the United States, encompassing Oregon, Washington, and the northern coast of California, contains a density of excellent motorcycle roads per square mile that is recognized within the American riding community as exceptional even by the standards of a country that has a great deal of excellent riding. The combination of coastal roads, mountain passes, river canyons, and forest routes provides variety within a relatively compact geographic area, and the climate, though wet in winter and spring, produces lush conditions through the summer months that make the same roads that are slick and gray in March feel completely different in August. The coast of Oregon in particular, with its combination of dramatic clifftop exposure and enclosed forest sections, has a specific quality that riders describe in terms that reference solitude, scale, and the particular feeling of being very small in a very large and indifferent landscape. That specific feeling is one of the things that motorcycle riding provides that most other human activities do not, and the Northwest gives it to you in concentrated form. The engineering challenge of making a motorcycle run correctly at very high altitude is more significant than most riders who venture into mountainous regions appreciate before their first high-altitude experience. An internal combustion engine relies on atmospheric oxygen to combust its fuel, and at altitude, the reduced atmospheric pressure means less oxygen is available per unit of air volume. This reduces power output approximately 3% for every 1,000 feet of elevation above sea level. A motorcycle rated at 100 horsepower at sea level produces approximately 70 horsepower at 10,000 feet of elevation. The rider's own physiology is similarly affected, with reduced oxygen affecting cognition, coordination, and physical strength at altitudes above approximately 8,000 feet for unacclimatized individuals. The combination of a less powerful machine and a less capable rider operating on roads that are often more demanding than those at lower elevations is one that deserves more conscious attention than most riders give it before heading for the high passes. The mountains will still be there when you've acclimatized. They are in no hurry. Motorcycle culture in Australia has its own specific character that reflects the particular geography and social context of the continent. The distances between population centers in Australia are large enough that long-distance touring on a motorcycle requires a different kind of logistical thinking than European or American touring, where petrol stations and accommodation are rarely more than an hour apart. The outback, which covers the majority of the Australian continent's interior, offers riding conditions that are found nowhere else on Earth. Roads that are straight for hundreds of kilometers, heat that is genuinely challenging to manage safely, wildlife hazards that include large kangaroos that move unpredictably and can be catastrophic in a collision, and the specific psychological experience of riding through a landscape that is simultaneously spectacular and indifferent to human presence. Australian motorcycle culture has produced riders and racing champions of international standing, and the particular demands of that landscape have shaped a riding sensibility that is pragmatic, self-reliant, and comfortable with solitude in a way that reflects the environment that formed it. The exhaust system of a motorcycle is its voice, and the people who modify exhaust systems understand this more clearly than any other aspect of motorcycle customization. An aftermarket exhaust on a motorcycle changes the sound in ways that are audible to bystanders before they have seen the machine, and it changes the character of the ride in ways that the rider feels through the entire body at every rev. The weight reduction of a performance exhaust system is real and measurable, contributing to improved acceleration and handling by reducing unsprung and rotating mass. But for many of the people who buy aftermarket exhausts, the weight reduction is secondary to the sound. The sound is primary. The specific exhaust note of a motorcycle is so central to its identity that riders who have owned a particular machine for years can recognize their own bike by sound alone in a parking lot from 50 meters away. This is not unusual. It is expected. The voice of the machine is as individual as the owner's own, and as recognizable to those who know it. The history of the Dakar Rally, which began as a race from Paris to Dakar in Senegal in 1978 and has since relocated to South America due to security concerns in North Africa, is a history of motorcycle capability being pushed against the limits of human endurance and mechanical reliability in some of the most extreme conditions available on the planet. The original route crossed the Sahara Desert, where the combination of soft sand, extreme heat, mechanical stress, and navigational complexity produced a failure rate that in the early years exceeded 80%. More than 70 people have died in Dakar-related events since the race began. The motorcycle class remains one of the most demanding individual athletic and mechanical challenges in existence, requiring competitors to navigate across hundreds of kilometers of terrain each day for 2 weeks, maintaining their own machines with limited assistance, managing their own nutrition and sleep in field conditions, and doing all of this while competing at pace against people for whom this is a life's work rather than a personal challenge. The machines that do this have evolved from modified production motorcycles to purpose-built competition machines of considerable sophistication. The riders who do it have not changed as much. They are still people who decided that this specific and excessive challenge was something they needed to find out about themselves. Let the road stretch out in front of you now. You've come a long way tonight. The facts keep coming because the world of motorcycles is deep and generous with its strangeness and its beauty, and there is no shortage of either. The specific feeling of a long downhill on a motorcycle, engine braking combining with gravity, the road falling away ahead, the horizon dropping, the speed building in a way that requires nothing from the rider except the decision about how much to let happen, is one of the more meditative experiences available on two wheels. On an uphill, the rider is working against something. On a long downhill, the rider is working with something, managing rather than generating, present rather than pressing. Experienced riders on long mountain descents frequently describe a state that is different from the focused alertness of fast cornering and different from the passive relaxation of cruising. It is something in between, attentive and restful simultaneously, which is a combination that is difficult to produce by any means other than movement on a machine that requires exactly this quality of presence. The most dangerous animal encountered on motorcycle roads in North America is not the deer, though deer are responsible for a significant number of motorcycle accidents and are genuinely dangerous. The most dangerous by rate of serious outcome per encounter, accounting for the unpredictability of the collision and the mass involved, is the moose. A moose can weigh in excess of 700 kilograms and stands tall enough that a motorcycle traveling at highway speed will make initial contact with the legs rather than the body, causing the body to fall onto the rider and machine with its full weight. Moose vehicle collisions have survival rates that are substantially lower than deer vehicle collisions for this reason. Moose are also darker in color and less reflective than deer, making them less visible in headlights at night. They are most active at dawn and dusk, which are also the times of day when light conditions are most challenging for visual detection. Moose are found across Canada and the northern United States, and riders in those regions who are not actively thinking about moose when riding at night or in marginal light conditions are taking a risk that the statistical record does not support. The particular knowledge that motorcycle mechanics develop over years of working on engines is not primarily book knowledge, though book knowledge has its place. It is tactile and auditory and olfactory knowledge, the kind that lives in the hands and ears and nose before it ever becomes verbal. An experienced motorcycle mechanic can estimate the compression of an engine cylinder by pushing the kickstarter through slowly with one finger and feeling the resistance. They can hear the difference between a valve clearance that is within specification and one that is marginally out, not as a conscious measurement, but as a felt deviation from a sound they know is right. They can smell a cooling system that is running hot before any instrument confirms it. This kind of knowledge takes years to develop and is irreplaceable by technical manuals, which is why experienced mechanics are valued in the industry in ways that are independent of their formal certifications. The knowledge lives in them in a form that cannot be extracted and stored elsewhere. It is the human component of the machine. There is a bridge in Scotland called the Rest and Be Thankful that crosses a mountain pass in Argyll at an elevation high enough to make the driving conditions genuinely variable year-round. Motorcycle riders crossing it in adverse weather conditions encounter an environment that is simultaneously demanding and spectacular, which is a description that applies to many of the best things that Scotland offers on two wheels. The Scottish Highlands provide motorcycle riding that is, in the considered opinion of a significant portion of the European riding community, the best available anywhere on the continent when the weather cooperates. The roads are narrow, technical, and almost entirely free of the traffic that burdens equivalent roads in more densely populated countries. The landscape is severe in a way that rewards the specific kind of attention that motorcycle riding requires. The weather does not cooperate as often as one might wish. When it does, the reward is in full proportion to the patience invested in waiting for it. The human hand's ability to modulate a motorcycle throttle with the precision required for smooth riding is the result of the same neurological development that allows a musician to play an instrument. The fine motor control used in throttle management, which involves subtle continuous adjustments in grip pressure and wrist rotation communicated to the engine through a cable or electronic sensor, draws on the same cerebellar pathways that underlie any skilled fine motor performance. This is why experienced riders describe the throttle as something they have learned to play rather than simply operate, and why the development of smooth throttle technique is referred to in instructional contexts as a skill that requires practice and development rather than simple instruction. The rider who can trail the throttle through a corner's apex with precisely the right rate of opening to manage weight transfer and traction simultaneously is doing something that is neurologically comparable to a pianist playing a passage at the correct dynamic level. The hand is the same. The application is different. The underlying intelligence is identical. The concept of dead reckoning used by navigators to calculate position based on known starting point, speed, direction, and elapsed time without external reference points is a skill that long-distance motorcycle riders develop informally through practice. A rider who has been on a specific road before will often have an intuitive sense of how far they have traveled and where they are relative to their destination that is more accurate than it should logically be, based on what can be consciously recalled. This navigational intuition is built from accumulated sensory data, topographic memory, time at speed calculations, and the particular feeling of a landscape that is remembered from a previous passage. It is not precise. It can be wrong. But it represents a genuine navigational capability that is not reducible to map reading or GPS dependence, and it is one of the skills that riders who do extensive travel without navigational aids develop and value. The ability to know where you are from what you can see and feel rather than what a screen tells you is a capability that becomes scarce when it is no longer necessary, and motorcycle riders are among the people who still practice it. The racetrack, as a concept, is one of the most honest environments available to a motorcycle rider who wants to understand the limits of their own capability. On a public road, the limit is set by law, traffic, and the presence of elements outside the rider's control. On a track, the limit is set by the machine and the rider, and the gap between the two is visible, measurable, and improvable. Riders who attend track days consistently report that the experience changes their road riding in ways that make it safer, not because they ride faster on the road after track experience, but because they understand more clearly what the threshold of control feels like, and they are therefore more aware of when they are approaching it in real conditions. The track teaches through information. The road is an environment with too many variables to learn cleanly from. The track removes the variables that are not about the rider and the machine, and what remains is a specific and honest mirror. Most riders look at that mirror once and want to look again. The sound of rain on a motorcycle helmet at highway speed is one of the most interesting acoustic phenomena of motorcycle riding, because it is paradoxically quieter than rain sounds in any other context. At speed, the rain is moving relative to the helmet so quickly that individual drops are no longer distinguishable as impacts. The sound becomes a continuous hiss, like white noise with a directional quality, covering the engine note and the wind, and leaving the rider in a specific acoustic cocoon that experienced riders who don't mind riding in the rain describe as oddly peaceful. The visor, running with water that streams across it in patterns that change with speed and wind direction, filters the visual world into something slightly abstracted, colors still vivid but edges slightly softened by the moving water. Some riders hate riding in rain for reasons that are entirely rational, principally because the grip available from most road tires in wet conditions is substantially reduced compared to dry. Other riders have made peace with it and found something specific and quiet inside the experience that fair weather riding does not offer. Both responses are legitimate. The road does not judge which kind of rider you are. The original meaning of the term horsepower, which is used universally to express motorcycle engine output, has a specific and documented origin in the work of James Watt, the Scottish inventor who refined the steam engine in the late 18th century. Watt needed a way to express the output of his engines in terms that potential buyers who were accustomed to evaluating work capacity in terms of horse labor could relate to. He observed draft horses working at a mine and calculated that a horse could do approximately 33,000 foot-pounds of work per minute, a figure he used as the definition of 1 horsepower. The calculation has been questioned by later researchers who suggest that Watt deliberately set the standard high to ensure that any engine he sold would compare favorably to a horse by his own measurement, meaning horsepower has always been a marketing-friendly unit of measurement as much as a strictly scientific one. The unit has survived unchanged for 2.5 centuries, and every motorcycle specification sheet in the world still expresses engine output in a unit that was designed to help sell steam engines to coal mine operators in 18th century Scotland. Tradition in measurement, as in most things, is durable when it is useful. The night is long and unhurried, and you have traveled a considerable distance through it tonight. From the earliest steam-powered machines to the physics of grip and sound, from the mountain passes of Europe to the volcanic roads of Iceland, from the records that cannot be explained without wonder to the ordinary moments of a ride that contain more than they first appear to. The world of motorcycles is not a small world. It is as large as the roads that carry you through it, and the roads go everywhere. There are people riding right now, somewhere in the world, on roads you will never ride, in conditions you will never encounter, with a focus and a calm and a particular kind of joy that needs no audience and no record. They are riding because the road is there and the machine is willing and the night air is exactly the right temperature for this specific purpose. They are not thinking about any of the things they left behind at the start of the ride. They are just riding. And in that state, which is available to anyone who has found the right machine and the right road and the right hour of the day, the world makes a kind of sense that it rarely makes standing still. The road keeps going. It always does. And whenever you need to be back on it, in your mind, if not in the saddle, this channel is here. The engine stays warm. The miles are always ahead. Good night and ride well. The clutch lever on a motorcycle, that small hinged piece of metal at the left hand that most riders grab without thinking about it hundreds of times per ride, is the interface between the rider's intention and the engine's willingness, and the feel of a well-adjusted clutch is one of the more underappreciated pleasures of a well-maintained machine. The clutch engagement point, the specific position in the lever travel where the engine's power begins to transfer to the gearbox, is something experienced riders locate without conscious measurement and use with a precision that influences every slow speed maneuver and every fast corner exit. Riders who have spent time on multiple machines will tell you that clutch feel is as individual as handlebar position or seat height, and that a clutch that doesn't feel right creates a low-level friction in the riding experience that accumulates into fatigue and reduced confidence over a long day. Clutch setup is one of the first things a rider new to a specific machine should attend to before spending serious time on it. A properly adjusted clutch that engages at the right point in the right part of the lever travel translates into a machine that feels cooperative rather than demanding, and that difference over a long ride is not trivial. The history of the speedometer on motorcycles is shorter than most riders would guess. Early motorcycles had no instruments of any kind. The rider's sense of speed came from the sound of the engine, the feel of the wind, and the rate at which the landscape passed. The first motorcycle speedometers, mechanical instruments driven by a cable from the front wheel hub, began appearing as optional equipment in the 1910s and became standard fitments on most machines through the 1920s. The accuracy of early speedometers was highly variable, and the instruments were regularly criticized in the motorcycle press of the era for reading higher than actual speed, which was a feature rather than a defect from a safety legislation perspective, and presumably also from a manufacturer's marketing perspective. The modern digital speedometer, accurate to fractions of a mile per hour and coupled to GPS confirmation on many premium machines, is a different instrument in every meaningful way from those early mechanical dials. What has remained constant is the rider's glance at the reading and the subsequent judgment about what it means for the road currently being traveled. There is a specific architectural phenomenon in urban environments that motorcycle riders encounter more acutely than drivers of enclosed vehicles. Wind channeling between tall buildings creates corridors of moving air that can be substantially faster than the ambient wind speed in open areas. And in cities with consistent predominant wind directions and parallel building faces, these channeled winds can produce strong lateral gusts that hit a rider without warning as they pass through intersections. The same building that shelters a pedestrian on the sidewalk from wind is actively directing and accelerating that wind into the road at the intersection gap, and a motorcyclist crossing that gap at normal urban speeds encounters the wind with no protection from bodywork and with a machine that is inherently more sensitive to lateral loads than a four-wheeled vehicle. Experienced urban motorcycle riders develop an awareness of wind channeling that becomes part of their general situational reading of city environments, anticipating the gusts at specific intersections on known routes and adjusting speed and position preemptively. It is one of the invisible competencies of experienced city riding that is essentially impossible to teach from a diagram. The physics of a motorcycle's moment of inertia, the resistance of the machine and rider system to changes in rotational state, explains a phenomenon that puzzles many new riders. A fully loaded touring motorcycle with panniers, top box, and passenger feels dramatically different to ride than an empty one, not simply because of the additional weight, but because of where that weight is located relative to the machine's center of gravity. Weight added high on the machine, in a tall top box or a passenger sitting upright, raises the combined center of gravity and changes the moment of inertia in a way that makes the machine feel ponderous and slow to lean into corners. Weight added low, in low-mounted panniers or a low-profile load strapped to the rack, has a far smaller effect on handling character. Experienced touring riders pack heavy items low and toward the center of the machine for this reason, and the difference in handling between a well-loaded touring machine and a poorly loaded one is pronounced enough that riders unfamiliar with the principle sometimes describe the same motorcycle as handling completely differently on different trips, without being able to identify the source of the difference. The source is where the coffee thermos is packed. The Isle of Man, mentioned earlier in tonight's ride in the context of the TT race, has a relationship with motorcycles that extends well beyond the annual racing event. The island has no national speed limit on its rural roads, making it legally possible to ride at any speed the rider and machine are capable of on unrestricted sections of the public road network. This legal framework, combined with the quality of the roads and the specific geography of the island, makes it a destination for motorcycle riders throughout the year who are not attending any organized event. The experience of riding on a road with no posted speed limit is psychologically distinct from riding on a posted limit road, even when the actual speeds traveled are identical. The removal of the legal constraint changes the rider's relationship with the road from one of compliance management to one of pure judgment, and the requirement to exercise judgment without the simplifying reference point of a speed sign is more demanding than it sounds. Most riders who visit the island for the riding rather than the racing describe the experience as clarifying in a specific way. The road asks you a question that is different when the answer is not provided for you. The motorcycle's role in emergency services, particularly in the delivery of medical first response in urban environments, has expanded significantly in the first 2 decades of the 21st century. In cities where traffic congestion makes ambulance response times unacceptably long for cardiac arrest cases, motorcycle paramedics riding smaller, more maneuverable machines have been shown to reach patients significantly faster than vehicle-based first responders. The time advantage in cardiac arrest cases, where each minute without intervention reduces survival probability by approximately 10%, translates directly into lives saved. The Metropolitan Police Service in London, the London Ambulance Service, and equivalent organizations in cities across Europe and Asia have invested in motorcycle-based rapid response programs that have measurably improved outcomes in time-sensitive medical emergencies. The motorcycle in this context is not a recreational vehicle or a cultural symbol. It is the fastest tool available for a specific and urgent purpose, and the riders who operate in this role combine riding skill with medical competence in a combination that few other professions require. In the early days of motorcycle racing on dirt tracks in the American South and Midwest in the 1920s and 1930s, the boards and dirt oval tracks where riders competed were known for conditions that made every race a negotiation with the limits of both machine and human. The motorcycle tires of that era had no scientific optimization. The suspension was rudimentary by any subsequent standard. The brakes on some machines were barely adequate to manage speeds that reached 80 miles per hour on surfaces that were variable from race to race and sometimes from lap to lap. The riders who competed in these events were, in almost every case, people who had taught themselves through direct experience with direct consequences for errors, and who developed riding skills that were extraordinary precisely because the environment demanded it. The culture of American flat-track racing, which has survived and evolved through nearly a century of competition, draws a direct line back to those original conditions, and the riders who compete in it today are working in a tradition that is among the most genuinely American forms of motorsport. The geometry of a motorcycle's steering head angle, the angle at which the front forks are inclined relative to vertical, is one of the primary determinants of its handling character. A steep head angle, meaning the forks are closer to vertical, produces quick, responsive steering at the cost of straight-line stability. A shallow head angle, meaning the forks lean further forward, produces stable straight-line behavior at the cost of steering agility. Sport bikes are built with steeper head angles than cruisers. Cruisers are built with shallower angles than sport bikes. The geometry is a direct expression of the design intention, and experienced riders can feel the head angle character in the way a machine responds to steering inputs within the first few minutes of riding a new machine. The feel of quick steering on a sport bike is not simply a matter of lightness. It is a different rotational relationship between the rider's input and the machine's response, and adapting to a different head angle after time on a contrasting machine requires a specific period of recalibration that experienced riders acknowledge and manage consciously. There is a record in the motorcycle world that receives almost no attention outside of the communities that produce the riders who compete for it, and that is the record for solo circumnavigation of the globe by motorcycle. The current recognized record is held by Urs Pedrita of Switzerland, who completed a circumnavigation in 2021 in 31 days, 13 hours, and 35 minutes, covering the minimum qualification distance of 18,000 miles across multiple continents and passing through mandatory checkpoints to verify the route. The logistical requirements for a competitive circumnavigation are significant. Visas, shipping documentation for the motorcycle on oceanic crossings, fuel availability calculations for remote sections, maintenance access planning, and the physical management of a rider who is trying to sleep in fewer hours than the human body would prefer in order to compress the timeline. The riders who compete for this record are not primarily racers. They are route planners, logistics managers, and endurance athletes who happen to do their best work at 80 miles per hour on two wheels with the clock running. And so the journey settles into its final miles. You have covered a great distance tonight through history and physics and culture and the specific quiet satisfactions of a world built around two wheels and the roads that carry them. The engine has been running for a long time, and it is time to let it cool. If what you found here tonight is what you needed, come back whenever the road calls you back. Subscribe, and the channel stays with you, available every night that needs this kind of company. There will always be more to know about motorcycles, more strange and beautiful and counterintuitive corners of this world to explore together. The road does not end. It just turns somewhere you haven't been yet. Rest well. The bike will be there in the morning.